It's okay, Daddy. We can leave. 8-year-old Sophie's whisper shattered the silence of Le Chateau's marble hall as cruel laughter echoed around them. Her father, Evan, felt his heart break until a chair scraped across the floor like thunder. The billionaire CEO everyone feared had just stood up. What happened next would not only change one girl's birthday, but shake the foundations of an empire. Stay until the end and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The October rain had stopped just an hour before Evan Brooks pulled his 12-year-old Honda Civic into the parking lot of Le Chateau. Water still glistened on the asphalt under the glow of ornate street lamps that looked like they'd been imported from Paris. He sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the restaurant's golden facade through the windshield spotted with dried raindrops. "Daddy, is this it?" Sophie's voice came from the back seat, breathless with wonder. Evan looked in the rearview mirror at his daughter's face, round cheeks still holding on to the last softness of childhood, dark curls pulled back with the blue ribbon her mother had given her 2 years ago. The same ribbon she wore every single day, even though it was faded now, the edges frayed. Sophie pressed her nose against the window, eyes wide as she took in the restaurant that looked more like a palace than a place to eat dinner. "This is it, baby girl," Evan said, forcing brightness into his voice even as doubt twisted in his stomach. "Happy birthday." "It's so fancy," Sophie whispered, and Evan heard both excitement and uncertainty in those 3 words. He killed the engine and sat in the sudden silence, broken only by the distant hum of expensive cars gliding past on the boulevard. His reflection stared back at him in the mirror, a 34-year-old man who looked 40, with tired eyes and calloused hands that no amount of scrubbing could make clean. He'd worn his best shirt tonight, a white button-down that had been best 3 years ago, now slightly yellowed at the collar no matter how much bleach he used. His only pair of dress pants, bought for Emily's funeral, still fit but showed wear at the knees. 3 months. 3 months of double shifts at the construction site, of saying no to Sophie when she asked for new shoes, of eating ramen 6 nights a week so he could save every possible dollar. All for this one night. Also, his little girl could have a birthday that felt normal, that felt special, that might help her forget, even for just a few hours, that her mother wasn't here to see her turn 8. "Come on, princess," Evan said, stepping out into the cool evening air. The smell hit him immediately, expensive perfume, fresh flowers, and something he could only describe as wealth. It had a scent, he realized, something crisp and clean that made him acutely aware of his own body. The day's sweat still on him despite the shower he'd taken, the dirt that seemed permanently embedded under his fingernails. Sophie climbed out of the car, smoothing down her dress, a pale yellow thing they'd found at Goodwill last week. Evan had watched her face light up when she spotted it, watched her carefully check the price tag, then look at him with those big hazel eyes that were so much like Emily's it sometimes hurt to look at her. "Can we really afford it, Daddy?" she'd asked, even though it was only $8. Now that dress looked shabby against the backdrop of Le Chateau, where a doorman in an actual uniform, white gloves and everything, stood at attention by the entrance. But Sophie beamed in it, did a little twirl on the sidewalk, and that made it worth every penny. "You look beautiful," Evan said, taking her hand. Her fingers felt so small in his, so delicate. "Just like your mom." Sophie's smile faltered for just a second, that shadow passing over her face like it always did when they mentioned Emily. Then she squeezed his hand 3 times. Their secret code. The one Emily had started. "I love you." Evan squeezed back 3 times. They walked toward the entrance, and with each step, Evan felt more out of place. A couple emerged from the restaurant, the woman in a dress that probably cost more than his monthly rent, the man in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like it had been painted on. They swept past without a glance, sliding into a waiting Mercedes. The doorman watched them approach, and Evan saw his expression shift. Subtle, but there. A slight tightening around the eyes, a faint downturn at the corners of his mouth. But he opened the door anyway, and Evan nodded his thanks, trying to ignore the way the man's gaze lingered on his worn shoes. Inside, Le Chateau was even more intimidating. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with cherubs and clouds, casting prismatic light across silk-covered walls. The floor was white marble veined with gold, so polished Evan could see his reflection in it. Fresh flowers erupted from massive vases on pedestals. Not simple arrangements, but towering structures of roses, orchids, and flowers he couldn't even name. Sophie gasped, and despite everything, Evan felt a swell of pride. He'd done this. He'd brought her here. A hostess stand stood just inside the entrance, manned by a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Her black dress was simple but elegant, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that somehow made her look both beautiful and unapproachable. She was speaking to a well-dressed couple, laughing at something the man said, her perfectly white teeth flashing. Evan cleared his throat as they finished their conversation, and the couple walked away toward the dining room. The hostess's smile remained in place as she turned to face them, but it changed, stiffened, became something else entirely. Her eyes swept over Evan's shirt, his pants, his shoes, then moved to Sophie, and Evan felt his jaw clench. "Good evening," she said, her voice cool and professional. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes," Evan said, straightening his shoulders. "Brooks, 7:30. The hostess looked down at the leather-bound book open on her stand, manicured fingernail tracing down the page. She frowned, turned a page, turned another. "Brooks?" she repeated, looking up at him. "I'm not seeing it." "It's there," Evan said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I called 3 weeks ago, confirmed it again on Monday." She made a show of looking again, turning pages back and forth, her frown deepening. "I'm terribly sorry, but I don't have any reservation under that name. Are you certain you called Le Chateau? Perhaps you're thinking of Le Jardin. They have a similar menu." "No," Evan said firmly. "I called here. I spoke to someone named Michelle. She said 7:30 on October 23rd. I confirmed the time, the date, everything." The hostess pressed her lips together in a thin line. "Michelle isn't working tonight, and I'm afraid without a record of your reservation, I can't seat you. As you can see, we're quite full this evening." Evan glanced past her into the dining room. It was full, yes, but he could see at least 3 empty tables from where he stood. His hand tightened on Sophie's. "Look," he said, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. "It's my daughter's birthday. I've been planning this for months. Can't you just squeeze us in somewhere, anywhere?" The hostess's expression didn't change. "Without a reservation, I'm afraid that's simply not possible. Le Chateau has very strict policies. Perhaps I could recommend another establishment. There's a very nice Italian place about 3 miles from here." "I don't want Italian," Evan said, and heard his voice rise slightly. He took a breath, forced himself to calm down. Sophie was looking up at him, worry creasing her forehead. "I want to eat here. I made a reservation here." "Sir, I understand your frustration, but I've checked our book thoroughly and—" "Can I speak to a manager?" Evan interrupted. The hostess's smile finally vanished completely. "Of course. Please wait here." She turned and walked into the dining room, heels clicking sharply on marble. Evan watched her stop at a table in the corner, lean down to speak to a man in a dark suit. The man looked toward the entrance, looked at Evan and Sophie, and Evan saw something pass across his face. Disgust? Annoyance? Whatever it was, it made Evan's stomach turn. "Daddy?" Sophie tugged on his hand. "Is something wrong?" "No, baby," Evan lied. "Just a mix-up with the reservation. It'll be fine." But as the manager approached, weaving between tables where people ate lobster and steak and drank wine from glasses that looked too delicate to touch, Evan knew it wouldn't be fine. He knew, with a sinking certainty, that this night he'd dreamed of, saved for, planned down to the last detail, was about to fall apart. The manager was in his 50s, with silver hair slicked back and a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He approached with his hands clasped in front of him, the gesture almost prayerful, but his gaze was assessing, calculating. "Good evening," he said smoothly. "I'm Charles Beaumont, the manager of Le Chateau. I understand there's some confusion about a reservation." "No confusion," Evan said, trying to match the man's calm tone. "I made a reservation 3 weeks ago. 7:30 tonight under Brooks. Your hostess claims it's not in the system." Beaumont tilted his head sympathetically. "I do apologize, Mr. Brooks. Unfortunately, I've checked our records myself, and I'm not finding any reservation under that name. These things do happen sometimes. Perhaps there was a miscommunication during the booking process?" "There was no miscommunication," Evan said, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. I spoke to Michelle. I gave her my name, my phone number, the date, the time. She repeated everything back to me. I called again on Monday to confirm. This isn't a mistake. But Beaumont's smile became strained. I understand you feel that way, Mr. Brooks, but without any record of your reservation, I'm afraid I cannot accommodate you tonight. Le Chateau books up weeks in advance, and unfortunately, we're at full capacity this evening. You have empty tables, Evan said, gesturing toward the dining room. I can see at least 3 from here. Those tables are reserved for guests with later reservations, Beaumont replied smoothly. I really must insist. I drove an hour to get here, Evan said, his voice rising despite his efforts to control it. I saved for 3 months for this dinner. It's my daughter's 8th birthday, her first birthday since her mother died. I called and made a reservation, I confirmed it, and now you're telling me you can't seat us because of some computer error? For just a moment, something flickered in Beaumont's eyes, a hint of genuine discomfort. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold professionalism. I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Brooks, and I sympathize with your situation. However, Le Chateau maintains certain standards. We have a dress code and atmosphere we must preserve for all our guests. I'm sure you understand. The words hung in the air like smoke. Standards, dress code, atmosphere. Translation: you don't belong here. Evan felt like he'd been slapped. Around them, conversations had begun to die down. People were turning in their seats, watching. A woman in diamonds whispered to her companion, lips barely moving. A man in a tailored suit smirked, shaking his head as if witnessing something mildly amusing. So that's what this is about, Evan said quietly. My clothes. My car in your parking lot. The way I look. Sir, I don't appreciate your implication. No, you don't appreciate me, Evan said, and now he wasn't trying to keep his voice down. You don't appreciate people like me in your fancy restaurant. Doesn't matter that I called ahead, that I've been planning this for months, that it's my daughter's birthday. What matters is that I'm wearing a shirt from Target instead of whatever designer brand you think belongs here. Beaumont's face had gone rigid. Mr. Brooks, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're causing a disturbance. I'm causing a disturbance? Evan laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm just trying to buy my daughter dinner for her birthday. Daddy, Sophie whispered, pulling on his hand. Daddy, it's okay. Evan looked down at her, and his heart shattered. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, her lower lip trembling. She wasn't looking at him, though. She was looking at all the people staring at them. A little girl who'd already lost so much, now being humiliated in front of a room full of strangers. There are plenty of other restaurants that would be more suitable for your family, Beaumont said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. I'm happy to provide some recommendations, but I really must insist that you leave. Now. More whispers rippled through the dining room. A woman with too much makeup giggled behind her hand. A man in wire-rimmed glasses shook his head in disapproval. At Evan. At them. Wrong place for people like them, someone said, not quite quietly enough. Can't just walk in anywhere these days, another voice agreed. Should have known better. Each comment was a knife, each stare a wound. Evan stood there, holding his daughter's hand, feeling smaller and more worthless than he'd felt since the day Emily died. All those double shifts, all that saving, all that hope. For this. For public humiliation. For teaching his daughter that the world would kick them when they were already down. Daddy, Sophie said again, and this time her voice broke on the word. It's okay, Daddy. We can leave. Those words, God, those words. They came out so small, so defeated, but trying so hard to be brave, trying to make him feel better, to give him permission to surrender, to accept that they didn't belong here. She was 8 years old, and she was trying to protect him. Evan felt tears burning behind his eyes. He looked at his daughter, his beautiful, kind, impossibly strong daughter who'd said goodbye to her mother 18 months ago and somehow kept getting up every morning, kept smiling, kept being the best thing in his entire world, and he knew he'd failed her. I'm sorry, baby, he whispered. I'm so sorry. He turned toward the door, Sophie's hand still clutched in his, and the crowd parted for them like they were diseased. Evan kept his eyes forward, refusing to look at any of them, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Behind them, someone laughed, low and mean. Someone else muttered, "Finally." Beaumont's voice followed them. "I do hope you find somewhere more appropriate. Perhaps somewhere with a children's menu." More laughter at that, scattered through the room like poisoned rain. Evan's hand was on the door handle when he heard it, a sound that made everyone in the restaurant go silent. The sharp scrape of a chair being pushed back. Hard, deliberate, loud enough to echo off the marble floor and silk walls like a gunshot. Evan turned, and so did everyone else. At a table in the corner, in the VIP section behind a velvet rope where the chandeliers seemed to shine brighter and the wine bottles cost more than Evan made in a week, a man had stood up. Not just any man. Even from across the room, even though Evan had never seen him in person before, he recognized him instantly. Everyone did. Lucas Grant, the billionaire CEO of Grant Technologies, the company that had revolutionized cloud computing and artificial intelligence. The man whose face appeared on the covers of Forbes and Fortune. The youngest self-made billionaire in tech, worth an estimated $30 billion according to the last article Evan had seen. He was younger than Evan expected, maybe 32, 33, with dark hair swept back from a face that would have been handsome if not for the cold fury etched across it. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Evan's car, perfectly tailored to his tall frame. A watch that was definitely worth more than Evan's car glinted on his wrist. But it wasn't his wealth or his fame that made the room go silent. It was his expression, ice and stone and barely contained rage. Every eye in the restaurant was on him as he stepped around the velvet rope, moved away from his table where his dinner sat half-eaten, his wine glass still full. His dinner companions, two men in equally expensive suits, watched with open-mouthed shock. Lucas Grant walked through the dining room like he owned it, which, Evan realized with a jolt, he probably did, or at least owned enough of something connected to it to make his opinion matter. He stopped directly in front of Charles Beaumont, who had gone pale. "Mr. Grant," Beaumont stammered, his previous composure evaporating. "Sir, I didn't realize you were—" "What?" Lucas said, and his voice was quiet but cut through the silence like a blade. "Did you just say to them?" Beaumont's mouth opened and closed. "Sir, this is simply a matter of restaurant policy. We have standards and—" "Standards," Lucas repeated, and the word was laced with venom. He turned to look at Evan and Sophie, his cold gaze taking them in, and Evan felt himself stand straighter despite everything, lifting his chin even as his daughter pressed against his leg. Then Lucas looked back at Beaumont, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You're telling me," Lucas said slowly, deliberately, "that this man and his daughter can't eat in this restaurant on her birthday because of standards. We have a dress code, Mr. Grant. Surely you understand—" "What I understand," Lucas interrupted, and now there was steel in his voice, "is that I just watched you humiliate a father and his 8-year-old daughter in front of a room full of people. I watched you make excuses. I watched you lie about a reservation. And I watched you teach that little girl that she doesn't matter because her father doesn't wear the right clothes." Beaumont had gone from pale to red. "Mr. Grant, with all due respect—" "No," Lucas said flatly. "You don't get to speak right now. You don't get to make excuses. You don't get to justify what you just did." He turned away from Beaumont and walked toward Evan. Up close, Lucas Grant was even more imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that were a striking gray-blue and seemed to see everything. But as he approached, some of the hardness left his face. He stopped in front of them, and for a long moment he just looked at Sophie, at her yellow dress, her blue ribbon, her tear-stained cheeks. Something shifted in his expression, something raw and painful, and almost too private to witness. "What's your name?" he asked Sophie, his voice gentler now. Sophie looked at Evan, who nodded. She wiped at her eyes with her free hand. "Sophie," she whispered. "Sophie Brooks." "Hi, Sophie," Lucas said, and he crouched down so they were eye level. "My name is Lucas, and I'm very sorry that these people were mean to you on your birthday." Sophie's lower lip trembled. "It's okay." "No," Lucas said firmly but kindly. "It's not okay. Not even a little bit." He stood back up and extended his hand to Evan. "I'm Lucas Grant. Would you and your daughter join me for dinner?" Evan stared at the offered hand, perfectly manicured, wearing a ring that was probably worth more than Evan would make in his entire life. He didn't understand what was happening, didn't understand why a billionaire CEO had just stood up to defend him, didn't understand anything except that Sophie had stopped crying. Evan started, then stopped. We can't. We couldn't possibly. Yes, Lucas said, and it wasn't arrogant or pushy, just certain. You can. You will. Tonight is Sophie's birthday, and she's going to have the dinner her father worked so hard to give her. He kept his hand extended, and slowly, Evan reached out and shook it. Lucas's grip was firm, warm. Thank you, Evan managed, his voice rough. Lucas nodded once, then turned back to the room. Every person in Le Chateau was watching, phones out now, recording. This would be on social media within minutes, Evan realized. The news within hours. But Lucas didn't seem to care. He looked at Beaumont, who stood frozen like a rabbit before a wolf. You're going to give Mr. Brooks and his daughter the best table in this restaurant, Lucas said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. You're going to provide them with whatever they want to eat. And you're going to do it with a smile and an apology. Of course, Mr. Grant, Beaumont said quickly, desperately. Of course. My deepest apologies, Mr. Brooks. If you'll just follow me. No, Lucas said. They'll sit at my table. Beaumont went pale again. Your table, sir? Did I stutter? Lucas asked, and there was danger in those 3 words. No, sir. Of course not, sir. Right away. Lucas turned back to Evan and Sophie and smiled, a real smile this time, though his eyes still held that strange, distant pain. Come on, he said. Let's get you two some dinner. As they walked through the dining room, Evan, Sophie, and Lucas Grant, the whispers started again, but they were different this time. Shocked, awed, confused. Someone dropped a fork, the clatter unnaturally loud. Someone else gasped, and as they passed the table where the man had called them people like them, Lucas stopped. He looked at the man, middle-aged, smug expression already fading, and didn't say a word. He just looked. The man shrank in his seat, suddenly very interested in his wine glass. They reached the VIP section, and Lucas held out chairs for both Sophie and Evan at his table. His dinner companions had vanished, fled or dismissed. Evan wasn't sure which. Please, Lucas said. Sit. Evan helped Sophie into her chair, and she looked around with wide eyes at the table that probably cost more to set than Evan paid in rent. Crystal glasses, china plates with gold trim, silverware that was actually silver. A waiter appeared almost instantly, the same one who'd sneered at them at the entrance. But his expression was different now, terrified and obsequious. Mr. Grant, Bring menus, Lucas said curtly. Bring them everything they want, and bring whatever you think an 8-year-old who loves birthdays would enjoy. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. The waiter practically ran. Lucas sat down across from them and leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since standing up, some of the tension left his shoulders. He looked at Sophie, who was still staring at everything with a mixture of wonder and confusion. Have you ever had lobster, Sophie? He asked. She shook her head, eyes wide. Then you're in for a treat, Lucas said. How about truffle risotto, filet mignon? I don't know what those are, Sophie admitted quietly. Lucas laughed, a real laugh, warm and genuine. Then we'll try them all. It's your birthday. You should try everything. Menus arrived, leather-bound and heavy. Evan opened his and felt his stomach drop when he saw the prices. Even with 3 months of saving, he couldn't afford more than 1 or 2 items. Maybe. Lucas, Evan said quietly, we can't. Tonight's on me, Lucas said, and his tone left no room for argument. No arguments. This dinner was supposed to be Sophie's birthday present from her dad. Now it's her birthday present from both of us. Evan felt tears threaten again, but he blinked them back. Why are you doing this? Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his expression distant. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost private despite the room full of people still watching them. Because 25 years ago, my mother took me to a restaurant like this. It was my birthday. I was 7. She'd saved for months, just like you, and they turned us away at the door. Told us we didn't belong there. My mother... He paused, swallowed hard. She held my hand and said the exact same thing your daughter just said. It's okay, son. We can leave. The pain in his voice was so raw, so real, that Evan felt it in his own chest. I'm sorry, Evan said, because what else could he say? Lucas shook his head. Don't be sorry. Just let me give Sophie the birthday I never got. Please. And how could Evan say no to that? So they stayed. They sat at Lucas Grant's table in the VIP section of Le Chateau, and they ordered lobster and truffle risotto and filet mignon. They ordered things Evan couldn't pronounce, and Sophie had never heard of. And slowly, as the food began to arrive, artfully plated, steam rising, smelling like heaven, Sophie's tears dried. She started to smile, started to ask questions. Is this really lobster? She asked, poking at the red shell on her plate. It is, Lucas said, showing her how to crack it open, how to dip the meat in butter. She tried it, her eyes going wide. It's so good. Better than chicken nuggets? Lucas asked, grinning. Way better, Sophie declared, and all three of them laughed. The dining room had returned to its normal volume, though Evan could feel eyes still on them occasionally, could hear whispers. But they were different now, curious rather than cruel, awed rather than angry. Between courses, Sophie peppered Lucas with questions. What was his favorite color? Blue. Did he have any pets? Not currently, but he'd had a dog named Scout growing up. What kind of car did he drive? Several, but his favorite was a vintage Mustang his mom had helped him restore when he was 16. Did you love your mommy? Sophie asked suddenly, and the table went quiet. Lucas's expression shifted, grief and love and loss all mixed together. Very much, he said softly. More than anything in the world. My mommy died, Sophie said, matter of fact in the way children could be about devastating truths. She had cancer. I miss her every day. I bet you do, Lucas said, and his voice was thick. I lost my mom 5 years ago, and I still miss her every day too. Sophie tilted her head, studying him. Does it ever stop hurting? Evan felt his breath catch. It was a question she'd never asked him, maybe because she was trying to protect him, or maybe because she already knew he didn't have a good answer. Lucas didn't lie to her, didn't give her false hope or empty platitudes. No, he said gently. It doesn't stop hurting, but you learn to carry it. You learn to remember the good things. You learn that the hurt means you had someone worth missing. Sophie thought about that, then nodded seriously. Daddy says Mommy is always with us, in our hearts. Your daddy is right, Lucas said, glancing at Evan with something like respect. And you know what else? Your mom would be so proud of you right now. Why? Sophie asked. Because when things got hard tonight, you stayed brave. You tried to take care of your dad, even though you were hurting too. That takes a really special person. Sophie blushed, pleased and embarrassed at once. The meal continued, course after course of food that Evan had only ever seen on cooking shows. The waiters, properly chastened, were attentive and polite. Beaumont himself came by twice to check on them, apologizing profusely each time, though Lucas barely acknowledged him. As they ate, Lucas asked Evan about his work, his life. Not prying, just interested, genuinely interested. Evan found himself talking about the construction site, about how he'd started as a general laborer and worked his way up to a crew lead position, about how it was hard, physical work, but honest, about how he was good with his hands, always had been. Emily used to say I could fix anything, Evan said, then stopped, surprised he'd mentioned her so easily. What did she do? Lucas asked. She was a teacher, Evan said, and couldn't help the smile. 3rd grade. Loved those kids like they were her own. Even when she got sick, she kept teaching right up until... He trailed off. She sounds amazing, Lucas said. She was, Evan agreed. She really was. The conversation flowed easier after that. Lucas told them about his company, about the work they did, but he made it simple enough that even Sophie could understand. He talked about growing up poor, about his mom working 3 jobs to keep them afloat, about how he'd promised her he'd make something of himself. Did you? Sophie asked. Lucas smiled. I think so. I hope so. But you know what? The money, the company, all of it. It's not what she would have been proud of. What would she be proud of? Sophie asked. Lucas looked at her, then at Evan, then around the restaurant, at all the people who'd been so quick to judge, so ready to dismiss. This, he said quietly, she would have been proud of this. By the time dessert arrived, a towering chocolate cake with 8 candles, brought out by a parade of waiters while the entire restaurant sang happy birthday, Sophie was glowing. Chocolate smeared the corners of her mouth, and her eyes sparkled with joy Evan hadn't seen in months. She closed her eyes, made a wish, and blew out all 8 candles in one breath. The restaurant applauded, and this time it felt genuine. "What did you wish for?" Lucas asked. Sophie grinned, chocolate on her teeth. "I can't tell you, or it won't come true." "Fair enough," Lucas laughed. As they ate cake, rich and decadent and probably illegal in some states, Evan watched his daughter laugh at something Lucas said. Watched her steal extra frosting off Evan's plate when she thought he wasn't looking. Watched her be 8 years old instead of the too serious, too grown-up child grief had tried to make her. And Evan realized something. This night, this disaster that had almost broken them, had somehow become exactly what he'd hoped for, maybe even better. When they finally finished eating, Sophie declaring she was too full to move with dramatic flair, Lucas signaled for the check. It arrived in a leather folder, which he didn't even open, just slid a black credit card into without looking. "Thank you," Evan said, inadequate words for everything Lucas had done. "I don't know how to—" "Don't," Lucas said, holding up a hand. "You don't need to thank me. If anything, I should thank you." "For what?" Evan asked, confused. Lucas was quiet for a moment, his expression distant. "For reminding me why I built all of this in the first place. For reminding me what matters." The waiter returned with the receipt, and Lucas signed it without looking. Then he pulled something from his jacket pocket, a business card, cream-colored with simple black text. "This is my personal number," Lucas said, handing it to Evan. "Not my office, not an assistant, me. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. Understand?" Evan took the card, feeling the weight of it. Okay. Thank you." Lucas stood, and so did Evan and Sophie. The restaurant had mostly returned to its normal rhythm now, though Evan could still feel eyes on them. "Happy birthday, Sophie," Lucas said, crouching down one more time to her level. "I hope this night was at least a little bit special." Sophie didn't answer with words. Instead, she threw her arms around Lucas's neck and hugged him tight. Lucas stiffened, just for a second, then wrapped his arms around her small frame. His eyes closed, and Evan saw his jaw clench, saw him fighting back emotion. When Sophie finally let go, she was smiling. "Thank you for being my friend." "Thank you for being mine," Lucas said, his voice rough. They walked out of Le Chateau together, Lucas accompanying them all the way to their car. The doorman practically tripped over himself opening doors for them this time. At the Honda, Sophie climbed into the back seat, already half asleep, happy and full. "Thank you," Evan said again, because he couldn't not say it. "Really, thank you for everything. Thank you for—" Lucas shook his hand. "Take care of her. And remember, you call if you need anything." Evan nodded, not trusting his voice. He got in the car, started the engine, and as they pulled away, he looked in the rearview mirror. Lucas Grant stood in the parking lot of Le Chateau, hands in his pockets, watching them leave. The billionaire CEO who'd saved Sophie's birthday, who'd stood up for them when no one else would, who'd somehow turned the worst night into the best one. "Daddy?" Sophie's sleepy voice came from the back seat. "Yeah, baby?" That was the best birthday ever. Evan felt tears, good ones this time, slide down his cheeks. "Yeah, princess." It really was. As they drove home through the October night, the city lights blurring past, Evan thought about what Lucas had said, about remembering what matters, about why he'd built his empire. And for the first time since Emily died, Evan felt something other than grief and exhaustion. He felt hope. Behind them, in the parking lot of Le Chateau, Lucas Grant stood alone in the darkness, watching the taillights of a 12-year-old Honda Civic disappear into traffic. His hands were trembling slightly, something they rarely did anymore, not even in board meetings worth billions or negotiations that could make or break his company. But tonight they shook, because Sophie's voice had unlocked something he'd kept buried for 25 years. "It's okay, son. We can leave. His mother's voice, as clear as if she were standing beside him. Lucas took a deep breath, pulled out his phone, and made a call. James? It's Lucas. I need you to find out who owns Le Chateau. I don't care what it costs. I want to buy it. By tomorrow. A pause while his lawyer asked questions. Why? Lucas repeated, looking back at the restaurant that had tried to break a little girl's heart. Because I'm about to make some changes. He ended the call and stood there a moment longer, thinking about the daughter who'd reminded him of himself, the father who'd fought for her, the mother he'd lost who would have loved them both. And for the first time in 5 years, since the day his mom had died, Lucas Grant felt like maybe, just maybe, he was finally doing something she'd truly be proud of. Lucas Grant didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse office overlooking the city, the skyline glittering below him like scattered diamonds, and watched the sun rise over buildings he'd helped finance, over a city that had once chewed him up and spit him out when he was just a kid with holes in his shoes and big dreams. The memory played on repeat in his mind, not just tonight with Sophie and Evan, but that night 25 years ago. His 7th birthday. His mother, Maria, wearing her best dress, the navy one she saved for job interviews and parent-teacher conferences. She'd held his hand as they walked into Chez Laurent, a restaurant that was fancy but not quite as fancy as Le Chateau. More achievable, she'd thought. More within reach. Lucas remembered the hostess's face, pretty, young, her expression shifting from polite to cold in the space of a heartbeat, as she'd taken in his thrift store clothes, his mother's worn shoes, the nervousness radiating off them both. I'm sorry, but we're fully booked this evening. But I called, his mother had said, her voice steady, even though Lucas could feel her hand trembling in his. I made a reservation 3 weeks ago. Rodriguez, 6 o'clock. The hostess had barely glanced at her book. I don't see it. Perhaps you called the wrong restaurant. And his mother, who'd worked doubles at the diner, who'd taken on extra cleaning jobs, who'd saved every spare dollar for months just to give her son one special night. She'd stood there and taken it, taken the lies, the disdain, the humiliation. Because what choice did she have? Lucas had looked around the restaurant, seen the way people stared, heard the whispers, watched his mother's shoulders curve inward, trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable, less offensive to these people who judged her worth by the price tag on her dress. It's okay, son, she'd whispered, tears in her eyes that she wouldn't let fall. We can leave. Buscas. Ico. They'd ended up at a diner where Maria knew the owner, where they ate burgers and fries and pretended it was exactly what they'd wanted all along. Maria had sung Happy Birthday, her voice cracking slightly, and Lucas had blown out the candles stuck in a free birthday brownie. He'd made a wish that night. I'll never let anyone make us feel small again. Now 25 years later, Lucas stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. His reflection stared back at him. A man who'd built an empire, who could buy that old restaurant 100 times over, who'd made his wish come true in ways his 7-year-old self couldn't have imagined. But somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten why he'd wanted it. Forgotten that it wasn't about the money or the power. It was about making sure no one else ever had to hear their mother's voice break as she tried to pretend everything was okay. Until last night. Until Sophie Brooks looked up at her father with those tear-filled eyes and said those same words, and Lucas had felt something crack open inside his chest that he'd thought was sealed shut forever. His phone buzzed. James, his lawyer, always up at ungodly hours. Tell me you have good news, Lucas said by way of greeting. Le Chateau is owned by a holding company, which is owned by another company, which ultimately traces back to a real estate investment group. They're willing to sell. $22 million. Done, Lucas said without hesitation. Lucas, you should at least think about, I've thought about it. Draw up the papers. I want it finalized by end of business today. A pause on the line. What are you planning to do with a high-end restaurant? Lucas smiled, but there was no humor in it. Change it. He ended the call and made another one, this time to Sarah Chen, his director of operations, and one of the few people who'd been with him since the beginning, when Grant Technologies was just him and a laptop in a studio apartment. Sarah, I need you to clear my schedule for the next 3 days. Lucas, you have the board meeting on Wednesday, and the presentation for the Singapore investors. Reschedule them. Reschedule the board meeting? Sarah's voice rose slightly. Lucas, they've been planning this for 2 months. Then they can plan for 2 more months. Sarah, I need 3 days. Please. Something in his tone must have gotten through to her because she went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Are you okay? Lucas looked out at the city waking up below him. I don't know, but I'm about to find out. By 8 in the morning, Lucas was standing outside a modest apartment building in a neighborhood where the paint peeled from window frames and children's toys littered the sidewalks. He'd had his assistant track down Evan's address. Not hard to do with the resources at his disposal, though he felt slightly guilty about the invasion of privacy. But he needed to do this. Needed to see them again. Needed to know that last night was real, and not just some fever dream brought on by too much wine and old memories. He knocked on apartment 3B, aware that he probably looked ridiculous in his tailored suit in this hallway where the carpet was worn thin and the fluorescent lights hummed and flickered. The door opened and Evan stood there in pajama pants and an old t-shirt, coffee mug in hand, eyes widening in shock. Lucas? Mr. Grant? How did you... Is this a bad time? Lucas asked. Evan stared at him for another moment, then stepped back. No, Come in, please. The apartment was small but clean, decorated with the kind of care that comes from having very little and making it count. Photos covered one wall. Evan and Emily's wedding, Sophie as a baby, a family portrait taken maybe a year before Emily got sick where they all looked so happy it hurt to see. A child's drawings were stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. A bookshelf held more children's books than adult ones. Sophie's still asleep, Evan said quietly, setting his coffee down. She was so excited last night she didn't crash until almost midnight, kept talking about the lobster and the cake and... He trailed off, looking at Lucas with confusion and something that might have been worry. Why are you here? Lucas reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was the business card he'd given Evan last night, which Evan had clearly left in his other pants, and something else. A crayon drawing. Sophie gave me this last night when you were settling the bill, Lucas said, holding it up. The drawing was simple, the way children's art always was. 3 stick figures holding hands. One tall with dark hair labeled Lucas, one shorter labeled Daddy, and one small with a yellow triangle dress labeled Me. Above them, in careful capital letters, the man who made my daddy smile. Evan's breath caught. She drew that? When? While you were talking to the waiter about boxing up the cake. She was very serious about it, made me promise not to look until I got home. Lucas stared at the drawing, at those 3 stick figures, at the smile she'd drawn on the one representing her father, and he felt that crack in his chest widen. I've been sitting in my office all night looking at this, Lucas said quietly. Thinking about my mother. Thinking about that night 25 years ago. Thinking about all the years I spent building this company, making money, gaining power, and somehow forgetting why I wanted those things in the first place. He looked up at Evan, who was watching him with concern. Your daughter reminded me, Lucas continued. She reminded me what matters, what's worth fighting for, and I... His voice caught, and he had to pause, gather himself. I need to tell you what I'm going to do. Evan pulled out a chair at the small kitchen table. Sit, please. You want coffee? Yes, thank you. They sat at the table, 2 men from completely different worlds, while Lucas explained. He told Evan about buying Le Chateau, about his plans to transform it, about the foundation he'd started planning in those sleepless hours before dawn. I'm calling it the Lily Brooks Foundation, Lucas said, and Evan's head snapped up, tears instantly filling his eyes. If you'll let me, it will provide resources for single parents, housing assistance, healthcare, educational opportunities, childcare, everything I wished my mother had access to, everything you deserve. Lucas, I can't let you... Evan's voice broke. I'm not doing this for you, Lucas said gently. Not just for you. I'm doing this for my mother, for Sophie, for every kid who's ever watched their parent break down because the world is too hard and they're too tired and there's never enough money or time or hope. Evan put his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Lucas sat quietly, letting him cry, understanding that sometimes you needed to fall apart before you could accept help putting yourself back together. "Why us?" Evan finally asked, voice muffled. "Why did you help us?" Lucas thought about how to answer that. "Because Sophie said the exact words my mother said to me. Because I saw my 7-year-old self in her eyes. Because I'm 32 years old and worth $30 billion. And last night was the first time in 5 years that I felt like I was actually doing something meaningful with it." He pulled out another envelope, this one thicker. "This is a check. It's for you." "I can't accept your money," Evan said immediately, not even looking at it. "It's not charity," Lucas said. "Consider it payment for reminding me who I used to be, for giving me back something I lost when my mother died." "What's that?" "Purpose." They sat in silence for a moment, the morning sun streaming through the window, dust motes dancing in the light. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. A car alarm went off outside and was quickly silenced. "Daddy?" Sophie's voice came from the hallway, sleepy and confused. "Whose car is that outside?" She padded into the kitchen in princess pajamas, hair mussed from sleep, rubbing her eyes, and stopped short when she saw Lucas sitting at their table. "Lucas!" She shrieked and ran to him, throwing herself into his arms before either adult could stop her. Lucas caught her automatically, lifting her onto his lap, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. When was the last time someone had hugged him like this? With pure joy, no agenda, no wanting something from him? "What are you doing here?" Sophie demanded, beaming. "Did you come for breakfast? Daddy makes really good pancakes on weekends. They're not fancy like restaurant food, but they're yummy." "I bet they are," Lucas said, his voice thick. "But I actually came to give you something." He set her down gently and pulled out the drawing she'd given him. "I was hoping you'd sign this for me, so I can frame it and put it in my office." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Really? You want my drawing in your office?" "Really? It's the best thing anyone's given me in a very long time." She grabbed a crayon from a jar on the counter and carefully wrote her name at the bottom, Sophie, in block letters, some backwards, then drew a heart next to it. "There," she declared. "Now it's official." Lucas took the drawing back reverently, like it was worth more than the Picasso hanging in his penthouse, because to him, it was. "Thank you," he said seriously. "I'll treasure it." Sophie studied him for a moment, her head tilted. "Are you sad?" The question was so direct, so innocent, that Lucas didn't even think to lie. "A little bit, but in a good way. Does that make sense?" Sophie nodded sagely. "Like when you remember someone who's gone and it makes you happy and sad at the same time?" "Exactly like that." She reached out and patted his hand, the gesture so motherly and sweet it almost broke him. "That's okay. Daddy says it's okay to be sad sometimes. It means you loved someone a lot. Your daddy is a very smart man." They ended up having breakfast together, pancakes like Sophie promised, slightly burnt on the edges the way Lucas remembered his mother making them. They ate at the cramped kitchen table, Sophie chattering about school and her friends and a book she was reading about dragons. Evan was quiet, still processing, still struggling to accept what Lucas was offering. But Lucas saw something else in his eyes, too. Hope. Tentative, fragile, like a candle flame in wind. But there. After breakfast, Lucas stood to leave. He had a restaurant to restructure, a foundation to launch, a life to redirect towards something that mattered. "I'll be in touch," he told Evan at the door. "About the foundation. About everything. This isn't just some impulse, Evan. This is real." "I know," Evan said. "I'm starting to believe that." Sophie hugged Lucas goodbye, making him promise to visit again soon. "Maybe you can come to my school?" she suggested. "We have career day next month. You could tell everyone about being a billionaire." Lucas laughed. "I'd be honored." As he walked back to his car, he heard Sophie's voice through the open window. "Daddy, I think Lucas is our angel, like Mommy sent him to help us." Lucas stopped, his hand on the car door, and closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind. Lucas Grant, who'd built a tech empire on ruthless efficiency and calculated risks, threw himself into this new project with an intensity that alarmed his staff and fascinated the media. First, Le Chateau. Lucas showed up at 9 in the morning on Monday, officially his restaurant now, papers signed and filed, with Sarah Chen and a team of consultants. Charles Beaumont stood in the entrance, pale and nervous, clearly having spent the weekend calculating his unemployment prospects. "Mr. Grant," Beaumont began, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. "I want to apologize for Friday night. I made a terrible error in judgment and—" "Yes," Lucas interrupted. "You did. You humiliated a father and daughter on her birthday. You enforced arbitrary rules designed to exclude people based on appearance. You forgot that every person who walks through that door is someone's child, someone's parent, someone who matters." Beaumont's face had gone from pale to gray. "Sir, I understand if you want to terminate my employment." "I don't." Beaumont blinked. "Sir?" "I don't want to fire you," Lucas repeated. "I want to teach you, because you're not the problem, Beaumont. You're a symptom. This entire industry is built on exclusivity, on making people feel special by making other people feel worthless. And I'm going to change that, starting here. But I need people who understand what we did wrong, who can help make sure it never happens again." He stepped closer to Beaumont, who was now visibly confused. "You're going to help me rebuild this place," Lucas said. "You're going to help me create something different. A restaurant where everyone is welcome, where dignity matters more than dress codes, where we judge people by their character, not their credit cards. Can you do that?" Beaumont stared at him for a long moment, then straightened his shoulders. "Yes, sir. I can. And I will." "Good. Because the first thing we're doing is staff training. Every single employee, from the dishwashers to the sommelier, is going to learn what hospitality actually means." Over the next 2 days, Lucas met with every staff member individually. He shared his story, the real one, not the sanitized version in his autobiography. He told them about being 7 years old and poor, about his mother's tears, about Sophie Brooks, and why this mattered. Some of them got it immediately. Maria, one of the line cooks who'd worked at Le Chateau for 15 years, actually cried. "I've been saving to bring my grandkids here for months," she admitted. "But I was afraid they'd turn us away at the door because I'm just kitchen staff, not fancy enough." "Bring them next week," Lucas said. "Your whole family. On me." "And Maria?" "You're getting a raise." Others took longer to understand. The sommelier, Gerard, argued that certain standards needed to be maintained or they'd lose their upscale clientele. Lucas fired him on the spot, made him the only casualty of the regime change. "The door is literally right there," Lucas said coldly when Gerard sputtered in protest. "And good luck finding another job after I personally call every high-end restaurant in the city to tell them why you're available." The message was clear: adapt or leave. By Wednesday, the transformation was underway. Lucas brought in diversity consultants, hospitality experts, people who understood that true luxury wasn't about exclusion, but inclusion. The dress code was abolished. The menu was expanded to include more affordable options alongside the haute cuisine. A community night was established. Every Monday, families who couldn't otherwise afford it could eat at Le Chateau at cost. No questions asked, no judgment allowed. But the restaurant was just the beginning. The real work was the foundation. Lucas assembled a team in a conference room at Grant Technologies headquarters. Sarah Chen was there, along with lawyers, financial advisors, nonprofit experts, and 2 people he'd specifically recruited. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a social worker who specialized in supporting single-parent families, and Marcus Thompson, who'd grown up in poverty and now ran one of the most successful community outreach programs in the state. "This is the Lily Brooks Foundation," Lucas began, standing at the head of the table with Sophie's drawing projected on the screen behind him. "Named after a woman I never met, whose daughter reminded me why I built this company in the first place." He outlined his vision: comprehensive support for single parents, particularly those living at or below the poverty line. Housing assistance to prevent homelessness. Healthcare access including mental health services. Educational opportunities for both parents and children. Childcare subsidies. Job training and placement. Legal aid for custody issues and domestic situations. Emergency financial assistance for unexpected crises. The goal, Lucas said, is to provide the safety net that society should already be providing, to make sure that no parent has to choose between their child's birthday dinner and paying rent, to make sure no kid has to watch their parent cry because the world is too hard and they're too tired and there's never enough. Dr. Walsh raised her hand. This is ambitious, beautiful, but ambitious. The infrastructure alone. I'm funding the first 3 years entirely myself, Lucas interrupted. $200 million. After that, we'll have established enough credibility to bring in other donors, corporate sponsors, government grants. But I want these 3 years to prove it works, to help as many families as possible without bureaucratic red tape or donor restrictions. The room went silent. $200 million. Sarah Chen looked like she might pass out. Lucas, she said carefully, that's non-negotiable, Lucas finished. This is happening. The only question is whether you're all in or out. Marcus Thompson leaned forward, a slow smile spreading across his face. I'm in. Hell, I'm all in. Do you know how many families we can help with those resources? Thousands, Lucas said. Tens of thousands, if we're smart about it. That's why I need the best people on this team. People who understand what it's like, what's actually needed versus what sounds good in a press release. He clicked to the next slide. A photo he'd found in public records, a news article from 15 years ago. A woman in a diner uniform, holding a trophy at some community service award ceremony. Maria Grant, smiling widely, proud and tired and beautiful. This was my mother, Lucas said quietly. She worked 3 jobs to keep us afed and housed. She never complained, never made me feel like we were poor, never let me see how exhausted she was. When I got my first big contract, the first thing I did was pay off her mortgage. The second thing I did was hire her a housekeeper so she could finally rest. His voice caught, and he had to pause. She died 5 years ago. Heart attack. The doctors said it was from years of stress and overwork and never taking care of herself because she was too busy taking care of everyone else. I was worth $1 billion by then, and I couldn't save her. But maybe I can save someone else's mother, someone else's father. Maybe I can make sure some kid doesn't lose their parent because society decided they weren't worth investing in. When he finished his presentation, every person in that room was crying, and every single one of them was in. By Thursday evening, less than a week after Sophie Brooks had whispered, "It's okay, Daddy, we can leave," Lucas Grant had restructured a restaurant, launched a foundation, and redirected the trajectory of his entire life. He sat in his office, exhausted but energized in a way he hadn't felt in years, when his phone rang. Unknown number. Lucas Grant. Mr. Grant, this is Amanda Wilson. I'm a reporter with the Tribune. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about the events at Le Chateau last Friday and the subsequent announcements about your foundation. Lucas should have expected this. The story had gone viral over the weekend. Dozens of people had filmed the confrontation, and the footage had spread across every social media platform. Lucas Grant was trending. So was hashtag Sophie Brooks, though thankfully no one had found their full identities yet. I'm happy to answer questions, Lucas said carefully, but I'd prefer to keep the family involved private. They didn't ask for this attention. Of course. But Mr. Grant, people want to know, is this genuine or is this some kind of publicity stunt? The question would have angered him a week ago. Now he just felt tired. Ms. Wilson, I'm going to tell you something off the record first, and then you can decide what to print. He took a breath. When I was 7 years old, my mother took me to a nice restaurant for my birthday. We were turned away because we didn't look like we belonged there. My mother, who'd worked herself to exhaustion to give me that one special night, had to take her crying son home and pretend it didn't matter. She died 5 years ago, and I never got to give her the life she deserved, the respect she earned, the recognition that she was worth more than her bank account suggested. He paused, looking at Sophie's drawing on his desk. Last Friday, I watched history repeat itself. I watched an 8-year-old girl try to comfort her father after being humiliated for the crime of being poor, and something in me broke open that I'd kept closed since my mother died. So no, Miss Wilson, this isn't a publicity stunt. This is me trying to figure out what the hell I've been doing with my life for the past 5 years and trying to make sure no other kid has to feel what I felt that night. Silence on the line. Then, that was supposed to be off the record. Print whatever you want, Lucas said. I'm done hiding who I was, who I am. The article ran on Friday morning, front page. By Friday afternoon, Lucas's office was flooded with calls, other corporations wanting to partner on the foundation, families sharing their stories, journalists requesting interviews, and one call that mattered more than all the others combined. "Mr. Grant, this is Principal Rebecca Martinez from Oakwood Elementary. I understand you promised one of our students, Sophie Brooks, that you'd participate in Career Day next month." Lucas smiled. "I did promise her that." "Well, Mr. Grant, she's told everyone in her class, and now they're all very excited. Would you really be willing to come?" Principal Martinez, "I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world." That Friday night, Lucas drove back to that modest apartment building. This time, Evan was expecting him. They'd talked several times over the past week, working out the details of the foundation, but Lucas had wanted to do this part in person. Sophie answered the door, still in her school uniform, and threw her arms around his waist. "Lucas, Daddy said you were coming. Are you staying for dinner? We're having spaghetti. It's not fancy like restaurant food, but Daddy makes really good sauce." "I'd love to stay for dinner," Lucas said. "Said and meant it. They ate at that small kitchen table again, Sophie chattering about school and career day and how everyone thought it was so cool that she knew a real billionaire. Evan was more relaxed this time, less overwhelmed, though Lucas could still see the disbelief in his eyes when he looked at him, like he expected Lucas to vanish like a dream. After dinner, after Sophie was in bed, the two men sat on the small balcony overlooking the parking lot, nursing beers that cost $3 for a six-pack. "I don't understand you," Evan said finally, staring at the city lights. "I've been trying to all week, and I just don't. You could have helped us that night and walked away. Could have written a check and felt good about yourself. But this, the restaurant, the foundation, all of it, it's like you've made us your whole purpose." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how to explain it. "When my mother died," he finally said, "I had everything I'd ever dreamed of. Money, success, respect, everything I'd promised to give her. But she was gone, and none of it mattered anymore. I kept working, kept building, but it felt hollow, like I was going through the motions of a life instead of actually living one." He took a sip of beer, grimaced at the taste, took another one anyway. "Then I saw Sophie's face last Friday. Saw her trying to be brave, trying to protect you. Heard her say those words, the same words my mother said to me. And suddenly I remembered what I'd been trying to forget. That before the money and the power and the success, I was just a scared kid who watched his mother break down because the world was cruel to people like us." He looked at Evan, who was watching him intently. "You didn't make me your purpose," Lucas said. "You gave me back my purpose. You reminded me that all of this, the company, the wealth, the influence, it's supposed to mean something. It's supposed to help people. And for the first time since my mother died, I feel like I'm actually doing something that would make her proud." Evan was quiet then. "She'd be proud. Trust me. Any mother would be proud of what you're doing." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two men from different worlds who'd somehow found common ground in grief and hope, and a little girl who'd said 5 words that changed everything. "Lucas," Evan said eventually, "thank you for all of it, for seeing us, for caring, for giving Sophie a birthday she'll never forget." "Thank you," Lucas replied, "for reminding me who I used to be, who I want to be again." As Lucas drove home that night, his phone buzzed with another message. This one from Sarah Chen. "Foundation paperwork filed. We're officially operational. You did it." Lucas pulled over, hands shaking slightly, and stared at the message. He'd built a billion-dollar company, negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions, spoken at conferences in front of thousands. But this felt bigger than all of it combined. He pulled up Sophie's drawing on his phone, the picture he'd taken before having it professionally framed. 3 stick figures holding hands. The man who made my daddy smile. For the first time in 5 years, Lucas felt like he was finally on the right path. Not the successful path, or the profitable path, or the impressive path. The right one. He pulled back onto the road and drove toward home, toward whatever came next, toward a future that suddenly felt full of possibility instead of empty achievement. Behind him, in that small apartment, Sophie Brooks slept peacefully, clutching a stuffed rabbit her mother had given her. And somewhere in her dreams, maybe she was still at that restaurant, eating lobster and cake, laughing with her father and the kind billionaire who'd refused to let the world be cruel to them. And maybe, just maybe, her mother was there too, smiling down at all of them, grateful that her daughter had found an angel when they needed one most. The morning of career day at Oakwood Elementary arrived with unseasonable warmth for late October, the kind of golden autumn day that made everything feel possible. Lucas Grant stood in the parking lot of the school, staring at the building that looked nothing like the private academy he'd attended on scholarship after his company took off, nothing like the prestigious university where he'd later endowed a technology wing. This was a public school in a working-class neighborhood, the kind of place where the playground equipment was worn but well-maintained, where teachers paid for supplies out of their own pockets, where every kid mattered even if society often forgot they existed. His driver had looked confused when Lucas insisted on driving himself this morning, even more confused when Lucas had chosen his vintage Mustang over the usual town car. But this wasn't a business meeting. This was a promise to an 8-year-old girl, and somehow that felt more important than any board presentation he'd ever given. Principal Martinez met him at the entrance, a warm-faced woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an air of competent authority that reminded Lucas of his mother. She extended her hand with a smile that reached her eyes, genuine rather than the practiced charm he usually encountered. "Mr. Grant, thank you so much for coming. Sophie has been talking about this non-stop for 2 weeks. I think she's told every student, teacher, and janitor in this building that you're coming today." Lucas felt his chest tighten with an emotion he was still learning to name. I wouldn't have missed it. They walked through hallways decorated with student artwork and motivational posters, past classrooms where children's voices rose in chorus and laughter. Lucas found himself slowing down, taking it in, remembering what it felt like to be small in a world that seemed so big, to believe that anything was possible if you just worked hard enough. "I have to admit," Principal Martinez said as they walked, "when Sophie first mentioned you were coming, I thought perhaps she'd misunderstood. Or that maybe you'd made a polite promise you didn't intend to keep. We don't often get billionaire CEOs at our career days." "Then maybe more billionaire CEOs need to remember where they came from," Lucas said quietly. She gave him an appraising look, like she was seeing something she hadn't expected. "Sophie told me what you did, at the restaurant. It's been all over the news, but she told me her version, about how you made her daddy smile again for the first time in a long time." Lucas stopped walking. "She said that?" "She did. She also said you're her angel, sent by her mother to help them." Principal Martinez's eyes were soft now. "I've been in education for 27 years, Mr. Grant. I've seen a lot of kids go through a lot of hard things. Sophie Brooks has been carrying grief that no 8-year-old should have to carry, but the past 2 weeks there's been light in her eyes again. Hope. You did that." "I just bought her dinner," Lucas said, uncomfortable with the credit. "No," Principal Martinez corrected gently. "You saw her. You acknowledged her worth when the world tried to tell her she had none. That's not just anything. That's everything." They arrived at Mrs. Patterson's 3rd grade classroom, and through the window in the door, Lucas could see Sophie sitting at her desk in the front row, practically vibrating with excitement. She was wearing a yellow dress, not the Goodwill one from her birthday, but a new one that Evan had sheepishly mentioned buying with part of the check Lucas had forced on him, and that same faded blue ribbon in her hair. The moment Sophie spotted him through the window, her face transformed. She jumped out of her seat, pointing, and Lucas heard her voice through the door. "He's here! I told you he was coming. That's him. That's Lucas." Principal Martinez chuckled. "I think that's your cue." Lucas took a deep breath and entered the classroom. 23 third graders immediately erupted into chaos, all talking at once, craning their necks to see him. Mrs. Patterson, a young teacher who couldn't have been more than 26, looked both excited and overwhelmed as she tried to restore order. Class, please. Remember what we talked about?" But Sophie was already out of her seat, running to Lucas and throwing her arms around him with the unselfconscious affection of childhood. Lucas caught her automatically, lifting her off the ground for just a moment before setting her back down. "You came," she breathed, beaming up at him. "I knew you'd come, but Tommy Martinez said you probably wouldn't because you're too important and busy. But I said you promised, and you always keep your promises. And you did. You're here." "Of course I'm here," Lucas said, crouching down to her level. "I promised, didn't I?" Sophie nodded vigorously, then grabbed his hand and dragged him toward the front of the classroom. "Come on, you have to meet everyone. This is my best friend Emma, and that's Tyler who's really good at math, and that's Jamie who has the best snacks, and Sophie, Mrs. Patterson said gently, fighting a smile. Maybe let Mr. Grant catch his breath? It's okay, Lucas said, letting Sophie pull him around the room, meeting each child with the same attention and respect he'd give to any business associate. Because wasn't that what his mother had taught him? That every person deserved dignity, regardless of age or status or circumstance? Finally, Mrs. Patterson managed to get everyone seated again, and Lucas found himself standing at the front of the classroom with 23 pairs of eyes fixed on him with varying degrees of awe, curiosity, and skepticism. Class, this is Mr. Lucas Grant, Mrs. Patterson began. He's the CEO of Grant Technologies and Sophie's special guest for Career Day. Mr. Grant, the floor is yours. Lucas looked at the children, some with new clothes and expensive backpacks, others with hand-me-downs and shoes that were slightly too small. Some confident and eager, others shy and uncertain. All of them full of potential, full of dreams, full of the possibility to become anything they wanted if the world would just give them a chance. He thought about the speech he'd prepared, the sanitized version of his success story designed for young ears. Then he thought about his mother, about Sophie's words at the restaurant, about what these kids actually needed to hear. How many of you like stories? He asked instead. Every hand shot up. Good, because I'm going to tell you a story about a boy named Lucas, and it's not always a happy story, but it's a true one. He pulled over Mrs. Patterson's desk chair and sat down, making himself smaller, more approachable. Sophie was watching him with rapt attention, as were the other children, and Lucas felt something settle in his chest, a rightness he hadn't felt in years. When Lucas was about your age, maybe a little younger, he lived with just his mom in a small apartment. His dad had left before he was born, so it was just the two of them. And his mom worked really, really hard. She had 3 jobs to make sure they had enough money for food and rent and all the things they needed. A girl in the second row raised her hand tentatively. What kind of jobs? She worked at a diner during the day, serving food to people. Then she cleaned offices at night. And on weekends, she did people's laundry and ironing. She was always tired, but she never complained. She always told Lucas that hard work was something to be proud of, no matter what kind of work it was. He saw some of the children nodding, recognizing their own lives in his story. One day, for Lucas's 7th birthday, his mom told him they were going to go somewhere special. She'd been saving money for months, putting aside a little bit from each paycheck, and she wanted to take him to a fancy restaurant. Lucas was so excited. He put on his nicest clothes, which weren't very nice. They were from a thrift store and a little too big, but his mom told him he looked handsome. Lucas paused, the memory so vivid it hurt. But when they got to the restaurant, the people there wouldn't let them in. They said Lucas and his mom didn't belong there. They said they didn't have a reservation, even though his mom had called and made one. They lied because Lucas and his mom didn't look rich enough to eat there. The classroom had gone very quiet. Sophie's eyes were wide, shining with recognition and empathy. How did that make the boy feel? A small voice asked. Lucas looked at the child who'd spoken, a boy with glasses held together with tape, wearing a shirt that had been washed so many times the color had faded to almost nothing. It made him feel small, Lucas said honestly, like he didn't matter, like his mom didn't matter, even though she was the best person he knew. And the worst part was watching his mom try not to cry, watching her pretend it was okay, watching her say, "It's okay, son, we can leave," even though it wasn't okay at all. Several children had tears in their eyes now. Mrs. Patterson had a hand over her mouth. But here's what Lucas learned that night, Lucas continued, his voice stronger now. He learned that how people treat you doesn't define your worth. He learned that kindness matters more than money. He learned that he wanted to grow up and make sure nobody ever made his mom feel small again. And he learned that the world needed changing. So what did he do? Tommy Martinez asked, the skeptical kid who apparently hadn't believed Lucas would show up. He worked hard. He stayed in school even when it was difficult. He got a scholarship to college where he studied computers because he loved figuring out how things worked. And he started a company in his tiny apartment with almost no money, just a big dream and a promise to his mom that he'd make something of himself. Lucas stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the playground where children would soon be running and laughing and being gloriously, messily young. That company became Grant Technologies. It became successful, made a lot of money, employed thousands of people. And Lucas became the person everyone called successful, rich, powerful, important. He turned back to the class. But you know what? For a long time, he forgot why he'd wanted to be successful in the first place. He forgot about that night at the restaurant. He forgot about his mom's tears. He forgot that the point wasn't to be rich. It was to make sure other people didn't have to feel small. What made him remember? Emma, Sophie's best friend, asked softly. Lucas looked at Sophie, who was watching him with those hazel eyes so much like her mother's. A brave little girl reminded him, on her birthday, at a restaurant, when people were being mean to her and her dad. She said the exact same words Lucas's mom had said. "It's okay, Daddy. We can leave." And when Lucas heard those words, something broke open inside him that had been closed for a very long time. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, and she pressed her hand to her heart. So Lucas stood up. He told those mean people that they were wrong. He made sure Sophie and her dad got to have their special dinner. And then he decided to spend the rest of his life making sure no other kid ever has to hear their parents say, "It's okay, we can leave," when it's not okay at all. The classroom was silent except for a few sniffles. Then Tyler, the math kid, raised his hand. "Is that why you started the foundation? The Lily Brooks Foundation?" Lucas nodded. "That's exactly why. Sophie's mom was named Lily, and she died before Sophie turned 8. But from everything Sophie and her dad have told me, Lily was an amazing person who loved her daughter more than anything in the world. So I named the foundation after her, to help other single parents like Sophie's dad, like Lucas's mom, to help families who are working hard but just need a little support, a little hope, a little reminder that they matter." Mrs. Patterson wiped at her eyes, not even trying to hide her tears anymore. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Grant?" a quiet girl in the back said. "Of course. What's your name?" "Zoe. My question is, do you think your mom would be proud of you now?" The question hit Lucas like a physical blow. He had to take a moment, breathe through the sudden tightness in his chest. "I hope so," he said finally, his voice rough. "I really hope so. My mom died 5 years ago, before I started the foundation, before I met Sophie and her dad. But I think if she could see what I'm doing now, she'd be proud. Not because I'm rich or successful, but because I'm finally using that success for something that matters." "She would be proud," Sophie said suddenly, standing up. "I know she would be, because my mommy in heaven is proud of you too. She told me." The classroom held its breath. Lucas felt tears burning behind his eyes. "She did?" he asked gently. Sophie nodded seriously. "Last night, in my dream. She was wearing her pretty blue dress, and she looked healthy again, not sick. And she said, 'Tell Lucas thank you for taking care of my baby and her daddy.' So I'm telling you, thank you." Lucas had given presentations to rooms full of investors worth billions. He'd negotiated deals that made international news. He'd spoken at conferences attended by world leaders. But nothing had ever undone him the way Sophie's words did in that third-grade classroom. He walked over to her, knelt down, and pulled her into a hug. "You're welcome," he whispered. "Thank you for reminding me what matters." When he finally pulled back, half the class was crying, including Mrs. Patterson. Sophie beamed at him through her tears, then impulsively kissed his cheek. "Can I tell them about my birthday?" she asked. "About the lobster and the cake and how you made everyone sing?" "You can tell them whatever you want," Lucas said, ruffling her hair gently. And she did. Sophie stood up in front of her classmates and told the story of her 8th birthday with the dramatic flair of a natural storyteller, the fancy restaurant, the mean manager. The moment Lucas stood up and everything changed. Her classmates listened with rapt attention, gasping at the mean parts, cheering at the heroic parts, sighing with satisfaction at the happy ending. "And then," Sophie concluded, "Lucas sat with us and we had the best dinner ever, and there was a huge chocolate cake with 8 candles. And everyone in the whole restaurant sang happy birthday to me, and it was perfect. It was the best birthday I ever had, even better than the one before Mommy got sick." The bell for recess rang, but nobody moved. Mrs. Patterson had to tell them twice that they could go outside before they finally started filing out, though several stopped to thank Lucas or ask for his autograph, or simply stare at him like he was some kind of superhero. Tommy Martinez was one of the last to leave. He stopped in front of Lucas, scuffing his worn sneaker against the floor. "I'm sorry I didn't believe Sophie," he said quietly. "I thought she was making it up. I didn't think someone like you would really come to our school." "Why not?" Lucas asked. Tommy shrugged. "Because we're not fancy. We're just regular." Lucas crouched down to the boy's level. "Tommy, there's no such thing as just regular. Every person matters. Every kid matters, whether they go to a school like this or the fanciest private school in the world. And actually, I like this school better. You know why?" Tommy shook his head. "Because the kids here are real. They understand that life is hard sometimes, that not everyone gets everything easy, that kindness matters more than money. Those are the most important lessons anyone can learn." Tommy smiled tentatively, then ran out to join his friends at recess. Mrs. Patterson approached Lucas, shaking her head in wonder. "That was incredible," she said. "I've never seen the kids so engaged. So many of them come from situations like Sophie's, single parents working multiple jobs, struggling to make ends meet. They needed to hear that story. They needed to see that someone like you remembers what it was like, that you haven't forgotten where you came from." "I had forgotten," Lucas admitted. "For a while. I got caught up in the success, the money, the power. It took a little girl saying 5 words to remind me who I used to be." Principal Martinez returned, smiling. "Mr. Grant, would you mind if we called a brief assembly? I know it's not what we planned, but I think the whole school would benefit from hearing your story." Lucas thought about his schedule, the meetings he'd rescheduled, the calls waiting for him, the 100 things that needed his attention. Then he thought about his mother, about the boy he used to be, about the man he was trying to become. "I'd be honored," he said. An hour later, Lucas stood on a small stage in the school gymnasium, looking out at 400 children ranging from kindergarten to 5th grade, along with all the teachers and staff. It was chaos barely contained, whispers and giggles, children waving at friends, the particular energy of an unexpected break from routine. But when Lucas began to speak, telling the story of that 7-year-old boy and his mother, the room fell silent in a way that Principal Martinez would later say she'd never seen before. He told them about hard work and kindness, about dignity and respect, about how the measure of a person wasn't in their bank account but in their character. He told them about his mother, about Sophie, about the foundation and why it mattered, and he told them something he'd never said publicly before. "I have $30 billion, Lucas said, and gasps rippled through the gymnasium. "That's more money than I could ever spend, more than I'll ever need, and for a long time I thought that was the point, to make as much money as possible, to be as successful as possible. But I was wrong." He paused, looking at the sea of young faces watching him. "The point isn't to have more, the point is to do more, to help more, to be more kind, more generous, more aware of the people around us who need support. Every single person in this room matters. Every single one of you has value that has nothing to do with how much money your family has, or what kind of house you live in, or what brand of shoes you wear." A small kindergartner in the front row raised her hand. "Mr. Grant, are you a superhero?" The question was so earnest, so innocent, that Lucas felt his throat tighten. He crouched down, meeting her eyes. "No, sweetheart. I'm just a person who got reminded that being kind is more important than being rich. But you know what? Every one of you can be a superhero. Every time you're kind to someone who's sad, every time you stand up for someone being treated unfairly, every time you help someone who needs it, that's being a superhero." "Even if we're just kids?" she asked. "Especially if you're kids," Lucas said. "Some of the bravest, kindest people I've ever met were kids. Like Sophie, who tried to protect her dad even when she was hurting. That's real courage." The assembly ended with thunderous applause and a standing ovation that made Lucas uncomfortable in its intensity. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man trying to figure out how to use his privilege for something good, trying to honor his mother's memory, trying to be worthy of the faith a little girl had placed in him. As the children filed out, many stopped to high-five him or tell him quick stories about their own lives. A girl told him her mom worked 2 jobs and she wanted to grow up to help her mom rest. A boy said his dad had just lost his job and he was scared, but the story made him feel better. A tiny kindergartner simply hugged his leg and said, "You're nice." Each interaction was a gift, Lucas realized. Each child a reminder of why this mattered, why he'd redirected his entire life's focus in the past 2 weeks. Sophie was waiting for him outside the gymnasium with her dad. Evan had taken a half day off work to watch the assembly, standing in the back with tears streaming down his face as Lucas spoke. Now he approached Lucas with something like awe in his expression. That was... Evan started, then stopped, shaking his head. I don't have words. What you said, what you're doing, it's going to change so many lives. It's already changed mine, Lucas said simply. Sophie grabbed both their hands, linking the three of them together. Can Lucas come to dinner again tonight, Daddy? Please? I want to show him my science project. Evan laughed. If Lucas isn't too busy... I'm never too busy for this, Lucas interrupted. What time should I be there? That evening, Lucas found himself once again at the small apartment that was becoming more familiar than his own penthouse. This time he brought a pizza, not from some fancy artisan place, but from the local shop down the street that Sophie had mentioned was her favorite. And this time, he didn't feel like a visitor or an outsider. He felt like family. They ate pizza on the couch while Sophie showed him her science project about butterflies, explaining their life cycle with the serious authority of an 8-year-old expert. She'd drawn pictures and written captions in careful letters, some backwards but all earnest. Butterflies have to completely change to become beautiful, Sophie explained. They start as caterpillars, and then they go into a chrysalis, and everything about them transforms. Mrs. Patterson says it's called metamorphosis. That's right, Lucas said, studying her drawings. Complete transformation. Like you, Sophie said matter-of-factly. You were one way before, and now you're changing into something different, something better. Out of the mouths of babes, Lucas thought, stunned by her insight. You're right, he said softly. I am changing, and you helped me do that. After Sophie went to bed, Lucas and Evan sat on that same balcony under stars barely visible through the city's light pollution and talked the way people do when the barriers have come down and genuine friendship has taken root. The foundation has received over 1,000 applications in just the first week, Lucas told him. 1,000. That's how many families need help, and that's just in this city. It's overwhelming, Evan said quietly. It is, but it's also hopeful in a strange way. Every application is a family that hasn't given up, that's still fighting, still trying. They deserve support. Because of Sophie's 5 words, Evan said, shaking his head in wonder. Because my little girl tried to comfort me, you've created something that's going to help thousands of people. It doesn't seem real. It's real, Lucas assured him. And Evan, I need to tell you something. The foundation's first recipient. I'd like it to be you. Evan's head snapped toward him. What? No, I can't. You're exactly who this is for, Lucas interrupted gently. Single parents working themselves to exhaustion, trying to provide for their kids, never asking for help because they're too proud or too scared or too conditioned to think they don't deserve it. Let us help you. Let us make sure Sophie has everything she needs. Let us give you the breathing room to be her father instead of just her provider. Lucas, you've already done so much, and I want to do more. I need to do more, please. Let the Lily Brooks Foundation help the Brooks family. It would be an honor. Evan was silent for a long moment, wrestling with pride and practicality, fear and hope. Finally, he nodded. Okay, he whispered. Okay, thank you. They sat in silence after that, 2 men from different worlds who'd somehow found each other at exactly the right moment, when both needed reminding of what mattered most. You know what the best part of today was? Lucas said eventually. What? Watching Sophie tell her story. Watching her be proud of her birthday, proud of her dad, proud that she helped change things. She's 8 years old and she already understands that one person can make a difference. That's incredible. She got that from her mother, Evan said, his voice thick with emotion. Lily always believed that kindness rippled outward, that small actions created big changes. She would have loved what you're doing. She would have loved you. Lucas felt tears prick his eyes. I wish I could have met her. In a way you have, Evan said. Every time Sophie smiles, every time she shows compassion beyond her years, every time she sees the good in people, that's Lily. She lives on in Sophie. They finished their beers as the night deepened. the city below them settling into its nighttime rhythm. Eventually, Lucas stood to leave, but at the door, Evan stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "Lucas, I need you to know something. Before that night at the restaurant, I was barely holding on, working all day, trying to be present for Sophie, dealing with the grief, the exhaustion, the fear that I wasn't enough. I was drowning and pretending I could swim. But you threw me a lifeline. More than that, you reminded me that good people still exist, that the world can still be kind. You saved us." "You saved me too," Lucas said, his voice rough. "I was drowning in success, suffocating under the weight of all that money and power and emptiness. Sophie's words were my lifeline, so I guess we saved each other." Evan pulled him into a hug, the kind between brothers or soldiers who've been through battle together. When they pulled apart, both men had tears in their eyes and weren't ashamed of it. Lucas drove home through quiet streets, his mind full and his heart fuller. At every stoplight, he found himself thinking about the day, the children's faces, their stories, Sophie's pride, Evan's gratitude, the kindergartner asking if he was a superhero, Tommy Martinez apologizing for not believing, the little girl who'd hugged his leg. He thought about his mother, about whether she could see him now, whether she knew what he was trying to do. He hoped she did. He hoped she was proud. At home, in his penthouse that suddenly felt too large and too empty, Lucas stood at the window overlooking the city and pulled out his phone. Sophie's drawing was his wallpaper now, those 3 stick figures holding hands. He texted Evan, "Thank you for today, for every day. You and Sophie have changed my life." The response came quickly. "No, thank you for seeing us, for caring, for being exactly who Sophie said you are, our angel." Lucas set down his phone and looked at the city below, thinking about all the families out there like the Brooks family, like his family had been, struggling, surviving, hoping for something better. He couldn't save them all, but he could try. He could build something that mattered, create systems that supported instead of excluded, use his privilege to lift others up instead of pushing them down. It wasn't redemption, exactly. His mother was still gone, and no amount of money or philanthropy would bring her back. But it was purpose. It was meaning. It was the life she'd wanted for him. Not the rich one, but the good one. And as Lucas finally went to bed that night, for the first time in 5 years, he slept peacefully. No nightmares about his mother's death. No anxiety about whether he was doing enough, being enough. Just peace. And the knowledge that tomorrow he'd wake up and keep trying to be worthy of a little girl's faith, a father's gratitude, and a mother's memory. 3 stick figures holding hands. A billionaire, a construction worker, and a child who'd reminded them both what really mattered. The man who made my daddy smile. That was worth more than $30 billion. That was worth everything. 3 months passed like water through fingers, quick and precious and impossible to hold on to. Winter settled over the city with the kind of cold that made people hurry from building to car, heads down against the wind, missing the small miracles happening around them. But Lucas Grant wasn't missing anything anymore. He'd become a man who noticed things. The way ice crystals formed on windows, the sound of children's laughter in the snow, the quiet dignity of people trudging to work in the pre-dawn darkness. The Lily Brooks Foundation had exploded beyond even his most optimistic projections. What started as a promise to one family had become a lifeline for hundreds. The first recipients had been carefully selected by Dr. Walsh and her team, single parents on the edge of eviction, families choosing between medicine and food, children sleeping in cars while their parents worked overnight shifts. Each story broke Lucas's heart and rebuilt it stronger, more determined, more alive than it had been in years. Le Chateau had undergone its own transformation. The restaurant still served the same exquisite food, still maintained its elegant atmosphere, but something fundamental had shifted. Now, on Monday nights, families who'd never dreamed of eating somewhere so beautiful sat at tables beside business executives and celebrities, all treated with identical respect and warmth. Charles Beaumont, the manager who'd once sneered at Evan and Sophie, had become the program's fiercest advocate, personally greeting each family and ensuring their experience was perfect. "This is what hospitality actually means," he'd told Lucas one Monday evening, watching a single mother and her 3 children try escargot for the first time, their faces cycling through skepticism to surprise to delight. I spent 20 years in this industry thinking it was about exclusivity. I was wrong. It's about dignity. But it was the small moments that Lucas treasured most. The text messages from Evan about Sophie's latest accomplishment at school. The drawings she made for him, now covering an entire wall in his office. The Wednesday night dinners that had become tradition, where he'd show up at their apartment with takeout or groceries and they'd cook together. Sophie perched on a stool narrating her day while Lucas chopped vegetables and Evan stirred pots on the stove. He'd become part of their family, and they'd become part of his. It was strange and wonderful and occasionally terrifying, this feeling of belonging to something beyond himself, of mattering to people for reasons that had nothing to do with his bank account or business acumen. On a Tuesday morning in early December, Lucas sat in his office reviewing foundation applications when Sarah Chen knocked on his door, her expression unreadable. "Come in," he called, and she entered with a tablet in hand, her usual efficiency tempered by something softer. "I need to show you something," she said, pulling up a video. "This went viral last night. 20 million views and counting." Lucas took the tablet, and his breath caught. It was security footage from Le Chateau, black and white but clear. The timestamp showed Monday evening, the community night. The video had been edited and set to music, something soaring and emotional that made his throat tight even before the images fully registered. It showed a little girl, maybe 6, in a dress that was clearly her Sunday best, walking into the restaurant holding her father's hand. Both of them looked nervous, overwhelmed, like they couldn't quite believe they were allowed to be there. The hostess greeted them warmly, led them to a table. The father's face when he saw the menu, saw that everything was included, no charge. Lucas watched the man's composure crack, watched him cover his face with his hands while his daughter patted his arm. The video cut to them eating, the girl's wonder at each course, the father's tears that kept coming no matter how hard he tried to stop them. Then it showed other families, an elderly woman with her grandson, a young mother with twins, a teenager dining alone with his foster parent, all of them experiencing something they'd never thought possible. The final shot was Charles Beaumont kneeling beside the first little girl's table, presenting her with a birthday cake they'd made special, even though it wasn't a scheduled birthday dinner. The entire restaurant sang, and the girl's face glowed with joy so pure it hurt to witness. Text appeared over the final image, the Lily Brooks Foundation in Le Chateau, where everyone belongs. This is what kindness looks like. Lucas's hands were shaking when he handed the tablet back to Sarah. "Who made this?" "One of our waiters posted it on his personal account, and it exploded overnight." Lucas, the response, "We've received 5,000 new foundation applications in the past 12 hours, and 300 other restaurants have reached out asking how they can replicate the program." Lucas stood and walked to the window, needing a moment to process. 5,000 families, 300 restaurants, all because someone had filmed ordinary kindness and the world had responded with hunger for more of it. "There's something else," Sarah said quietly. "The media wants interviews. Everyone from local news to national morning shows. They want to know about you, about the foundation, about the family that started all of this." Lucas turned sharply. "No, absolutely not. The Brooks family stays private. I won't exploit them for publicity." "I figured you'd say that. But Lucas, people want to understand this. They want to know how one dinner transformed into a movement. You could inspire—" "I don't want to inspire people," Lucas interrupted, then stopped, hearing how that sounded. "I mean, I do, but not like this. Not by turning Sophie and Evan into some kind of story. They're real people who've been through hell. They deserve their privacy." Sarah nodded, understanding as she always did. "What if we controlled the narrative? What if you did one interview, told the story your way, and made it clear that the Brooks family is off limits? Use the platform to talk about the foundation, about why this matters." Lucas considered this, thinking about his mother, about what she'd want. Maria Grant had never sought attention, had worked her 3 jobs in quiet dignity, had raised her son to believe that good deeds were their own reward. But she'd also believed in speaking truth, in using whatever influence you had to help others. "One interview," he said finally, "but I choose who, when, and what we discuss. And the moment they try to exploit Sophie or Evan, it's over." The interview was scheduled for the following week with Janet Morrison, a journalist known for her empathetic approach and integrity. She met Lucas at Le Chateau on a Tuesday afternoon when the restaurant was closed, just the two of them and a small camera crew. Janet was in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen enough of the world to be skeptical but not cynical. She shook Lucas's hand firmly, then looked around the restaurant with appreciation. "It's beautiful," she said, "but different than I expected. Less intimidating." "That's intentional," Lucas replied. "We wanted it to feel elegant but welcoming, like somewhere you'd want to celebrate the best night of your life, regardless of who you are or where you come from." They sat at a table in the corner, the same table where Lucas had sat with Sophie and Evan that first night. He'd requested it specifically, wanting the physical reminder of why he was doing this. Janet declined coffee, pulled out her notes, then set them aside and looked at Lucas directly. "Before we start recording, I want you to know something. I grew up poor. Single mother, 3 kids, more nights than I can count when dinner was whatever we could cobble together from the food bank. I know what it's like to be invisible to people with money, to be treated like you don't matter because your clothes are wrong or your shoes have holes." Lucas met her eyes, saw the truth there. "Then you understand why this matters." "I do. Which is why I promise you, this interview will be respectful. No gotcha questions, no exploitation, no manufactured drama, just truth. Can you give me that in return?" "Yes," Lucas said. "I can." The cameras rolled and Janet opened with a question he hadn't expected. "Lucas Grant, when did you first realize you'd lost yourself?" He blinked, thrown off balance by her directness. But maybe that was exactly what this needed. Not the polished corporate Lucas, but the real one, still figuring things out. 5 years ago, he said slowly, when my mother died. I was worth billions by then, had everything I'd ever dreamed of, everything I'd promised to give her. But she was gone, and suddenly all of it felt meaningless. I kept working, kept building the company, but I was going through the motions, successful but empty. What changed? Lucas smiled, and it was genuine despite the cameras. A little girl said 5 words that broke something open inside me. 5 words that my mother had said to me 25 years earlier in almost the exact same situation. And I realized I'd forgotten the most important thing, why I'd wanted success in the first place. Not for the money or the power, but to make sure nobody else had to feel small the way we did. He told the story then, all of it. His 7th birthday, his mother's tears, the humiliation that had burned into his soul. The night at Le Chateau when history repeated itself, when Sophie Brooks tried to comfort her father the way Lucas had tried to comfort his mother. The moment he stood up, and everything changed. I saw myself in her, Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. Saw my mother in her father. Saw a chance to do what nobody did for us that night. To stand up and say, this is wrong, this matters, you matter. Janet leaned forward slightly. Tell me about the foundation. Why name it after Lily Brooks? Because she's who this is really for, Lucas said. The parents working themselves to death to provide for their kids. The mothers and fathers making impossible choices between rent and food, medicine and utilities. The people who never ask for help because they've been conditioned to believe they don't deserve it. He talked about the foundation's mission, the families they'd helped, the ripple effects he was seeing. A mother who'd been able to quit her 3rd job and actually attend her son's basketball games. A father who'd afforded the medicine his daughter needed for her asthma. A family who'd avoided eviction and was now stable, thriving, the kids' grades improving because they weren't worried about where they'd sleep. Each story is a life changed, Lucas said. Each family we help is a kid who can focus on being a kid instead of worrying about adult problems. That's worth more than any business deal I've ever made. You've donated $200 million to fund this, Janet said. That's not charity, that's transformation. What do you say to people who call this a publicity stunt? Lucas's jaw tightened, then relaxed. I'd say they're entitled to their opinion, and I'd ask them to volunteer at a food bank, or a homeless shelter, or anywhere they can see firsthand what poverty actually looks like. It's not about deserving or not deserving. It's about systems that are broken, and people who are struggling despite working harder than most of us can imagine. If they still think it's a publicity stunt after that, then we have different definitions of what matters in life. They talked for over an hour. Janet asking thoughtful questions that pushed Lucas to articulate things he'd barely admitted to himself. About the loneliness of success, about survivor's guilt when his company thrived while others failed, about the weight of having resources that could literally save lives, and the responsibility that came with that. Near the end, Janet asked the question Lucas had been dreading. "Will you tell me about Sophie Brooks?" "No," Lucas said firmly but not unkindly. "Sophie and her father have been through enough. They don't need media attention or strangers analyzing their grief or their circumstances. What I will tell you is that Sophie is one of the bravest, kindest, most remarkable children I've ever met. She lost her mother at 6 years old, and instead of letting that break her, she uses it to fuel compassion. She sees people who are hurting, and she helps them, even when she's hurting too." His voice cracked slightly. That night at the restaurant, she could have been angry or embarrassed. Instead, she tried to protect her father. She gave him permission to leave with dignity. That's courage. That's grace. That's everything I hope this foundation can help preserve in kids who've been through too much. "She changed your life," Janet said softly. "She saved my life," Lucas corrected. "She reminded me who I was before the money, before the success, before I forgot that kindness matters more than anything else. And if this interview, this foundation, this movement, if any of it inspires even one person to stand up for someone being treated unfairly, then it's all worth it." The interview aired 2 days later, and the response was overwhelming. The foundation's website crashed from traffic. Donations poured in, not just from wealthy philanthropists, but from regular people giving $5, $10, $20 because they wanted to be part of something good. Other CEOs announced similar initiatives. Teachers showed the interview in classrooms as a lesson in character. But Lucas barely noticed any of it, because that same day, something far more important happened. He was in a meeting with Dr. Walsh reviewing applications when his phone rang, Evan's name on the screen. Lucas excused himself and answered immediately, his heart rate picking up because Evan never called during work hours. "Lucas," Evan's voice was shaking. Can you come to the hospital? It's Sophie, Lucas didn't hear the rest. He was already running for the elevator, keys in hand telling Sarah to clear his schedule, his mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Not Sophie, please, not Sophie. He made the 20-minute drive in 12, parked illegally, and sprinted through the emergency room entrance. Evan was in the waiting area, still in his work clothes, covered in concrete dust, his face a mask of terror. "What happened?" Lucas demanded, grabbing Evan's shoulders. "Is she okay?" "She collapsed at school," Evan said, his voice breaking. "Just fell over during recess. They said she hit her head pretty hard, and they're running tests, and Lucas, what if it's like Emily? What if—" "Don't," Lucas said firmly, pulling Evan into a fierce hug. "Don't go there yet. Sophie is strong. She's going to be fine." But his own heart was pounding with fear, and he found himself bargaining with a God he hadn't spoken to in years. Take anything, the money, the company, the success. Just let Sophie be okay. They waited for 2 hours that felt like 20. Lucas sat beside Evan in uncomfortable plastic chairs, holding his hand the way you'd hold a brother's, both of them too scared to speak much, too desperate for good news to tolerate small talk. Finally, a doctor emerged, a kind-faced woman in her 40s. "Mr. Brooks?" Evan was on his feet instantly. "How is she?" "Is she—" "Sophie is going to be fine," the doctor said, and both men sagged with relief so profound it was physical. "She has a mild concussion from the fall, and we want to keep her overnight for observation, but all her tests came back normal, no signs of anything serious." "Can I see her?" Evan asked desperately. "Of course, she's been asking for you. And for someone named Lucas?" Lucas felt his throat close up. "That's me." The doctor smiled. "She's very insistent that you both be there. Come on." Sophie was in a pediatric room decorated with cheerful murals of cartoon animals, sitting up in bed with a bandage on her forehead and an IV in her small arm. She looked pale and tired, but when she saw them, her face lit up. "Daddy? Lucas!" She tried to sit up straighter and winced. "Easy, princess," Evan said, rushing to her side and taking her hand gently. "Don't move too fast." "I'm okay," Sophie insisted. "I just got dizzy and fell. I'm sorry I scared you." You never have to apologize for that, Evan said, tears streaming down his face. Never. I'm just so glad you're okay. Sophie looked past him to Lucas, who stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed by the relief and terror still coursing through him. Lucas, why are you crying? He hadn't realized he was. He touched his face, felt the wetness there, and couldn't even bring himself to be embarrassed about it. Because I was scared, he admitted, moving to the other side of her bed. Because you're important to me, Sophie. Because the thought of something happening to you. His voice broke. Sophie reached out her hand, the one without the IV, and Lucas took it carefully. Her fingers were so small in his, so fragile, and the thought that he'd almost lost her, that Evan had almost lost her. I'm okay, Sophie repeated, squeezing his hand. See? I'm tough, like Daddy says. You are tough, Lucas agreed, his voice rough. The toughest kid I know. They stayed with her while she ate bland hospital food and complained about the taste, while she flipped through channels on the TV and provided commentary on every show, while nurses came and went checking her vitals and charting information. Evan never let go of her hand, and Lucas found himself unable to leave, texting Sarah that he wouldn't be back today, maybe not tomorrow either, and not caring that he was missing important meetings. Nothing was more important than this, than being here for Sophie and Evan, than making sure they knew they weren't alone. As evening fell and Sophie finally drifted off to sleep, the doctor returned to check on her one more time. She examined Sophie gently, then turned to Evan and Lucas with a more serious expression. Can we talk outside? She asked quietly. Lucas's stomach dropped. Evan's face went white. They followed the doctor into the hallway and she closed the door softly behind them. Sophie is going to be fine from this fall, she began, but I need to talk to you about something else. Mr. Brooks, when was the last time Sophie had a comprehensive physical? Not just a school checkup, but full blood work, panels, the complete picture. Evan's voice was barely a whisper. Not since before Emily died. There's been so much, and the insurance doesn't cover everything, and I kept meaning to, but I'm not judging you, the doctor said kindly. I'm asking because I want to run some additional tests while Sophie is here. Nothing urgent, nothing that suggests anything is immediately wrong. But she's thin, thinner than she should be, and there are some indicators that suggest she might not be getting adequate nutrition. I want to make sure we're not missing anything. Malnutrition, Lucas said sharply. But Evan provides... I know, the doctor interrupted gently. I'm sure he does everything he can. But Mr. Brooks, the truth is that many working families in this country struggle to provide adequate nutrition even when they're doing everything right. The cost of healthy food, the time required to prepare it, the stress that suppresses appetite, it all adds up. Evan had gone very still, very quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded either explosion or implosion. Lucas recognized it because he'd seen his mother wear that same expression when a bill collector called, or when they had to choose between electricity and food, or any of the 1,000 moments when poverty ground you down and made you feel like you were failing. I'll pay for it, Lucas said immediately. Whatever test she needs, whatever treatment, whatever... Lucas, you can't keep... Evan started, but Lucas cut him off. Yes, I can. I can, and I will. This is exactly what the foundation is for, Evan. This is exactly why it exists. He turned to the doctor. Run every test. Do a complete workup. Money is not a factor here. The doctor nodded. I'll put in the orders. We'll have results by tomorrow afternoon. She paused, looking between them. Sophie is lucky to have both of you. Not every child has this kind of support system. After she left, Evan slid down the wall and sat on the floor of the hallway, his head in his hands. Lucas sat beside him, their shoulders touching, and waited. I've been failing her, Evan finally said, his voice muffled. All this time, I thought I was doing okay. Thought we were managing, but I've been letting my daughter go hungry. Stop, Lucas said firmly. You've been doing everything humanly possible with the resources you have. You work 60 hours a week. You show up for Sophie every single day. You love her with everything you have. That's not failing. That's surviving a system designed to keep people like you down. But she's malnourished, Lucas. My little girl is... She's going to be fine, Lucas interrupted. Because you got her here. Because you've never given up. Because you're a good father who loves his daughter more than anything in the world. And now you have help. That's not failure. That's courage. Accepting support when you need it. Evan looked at him. eyes red and exhausted. How did I get so lucky? How did Sophie saying 5 words lead to you, to all of this? I think your wife had something to do with it, Lucas said softly. Sophie thinks so. And honestly, I'm starting to believe it too. They sat there for a long time, 2 men who'd become brothers through circumstance and choice, holding each other up the way people do when life gets too heavy to carry alone. The next morning brought better news than either of them had dared hope for. Sophie's tests showed mild nutritional deficiencies, iron, vitamin D, a few others, but nothing severe, nothing permanent, nothing that couldn't be corrected with proper diet and supplements. The relief was so profound that Evan actually laughed, the sound startled out of him by sheer gratitude. Dr. Walsh arrived at the hospital that afternoon with a care package she'd assembled: grocery gift cards, meal planning resources, nutrition guides, and a personal referral to a nutritionist covered by the foundation. She sat with Evan for an hour, discussing strategies and support, making sure he understood this wasn't his fault, that he wasn't alone anymore. Sophie was discharged that evening with a clean bill of health, a reminder to take it easy for a few days, and strict instructions about the supplements she needed to take. She chattered the whole way to the car about how the hospital food was terrible except for the Jell-O, and how one of the nurses had told her she was the bravest patient she'd seen all week, and how the doctor said she could go back to school on Monday. Lucas drove them home. Evan was too exhausted to trust himself behind the wheel, and carried Sophie up the stairs when her energy suddenly crashed, the little girl falling asleep against his shoulder with the easy trust of childhood. He laid her gently in her bed, the one with the pink comforter and the stuffed animals arranged precisely how she liked them, and felt something settle in his chest that he'd never felt before. This was what mattered. Not the billions or the company or the success. This, making sure a little girl could sleep safely in her bed, with food in her belly and people who loved her nearby. This was everything. In the kitchen, Evan made coffee neither of them wanted, but both needed something to do with their hands. They sat at the table and Lucas pulled out his phone. I'm putting together a team, he said. Medical professionals, nutritionists, social workers. Every family in the foundation program is going to have access to comprehensive health care, including preventive care. No more waiting until something is urgent. No more choosing between medicine and rent. Lucas, that's going to cost. I don't care what it costs, Lucas said flatly. I'm worth $30 billion. If I can't use that to make sure kids like Sophie stay healthy, then what's the point of any of it? Evan stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head with something like wonder. You really mean that? Every word. Evan, I've been thinking the foundation is good, but it's not enough. We're helping hundreds of families, maybe thousands, eventually. But there are millions who need support. I want to do more. I want to push for policy changes, for systemic reform. I want to use whatever influence I have to make sure no parent has to go through what you've been through, what my mother went through. That's a big fight, Evan said quietly. I know. But I've got resources, a platform, and a reason to fight. 3 reasons, actually. Lucas pulled up the photo that was still his phone wallpaper, Sophie's drawing of the 3 stick figures. A little girl reminded me what matters. Now I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to build a world worthy of her. They talked late into the night, making plans, dreaming bigger, imagining what could be possible if enough people cared enough to fight for change. And when Lucas finally drove home as dawn was breaking, he felt more alive than he had in years, tired and scared and hopeful all at once. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophie, who must have woken early. Thank you for staying with me at the hospital. You're my best friend besides Emma, and Daddy, and Mommy in heaven. Lucas pulled over because he couldn't see through his tears, couldn't breathe through the emotion flooding his chest. Best friend. This 8-year-old child who'd survived more loss than most adults could handle considered him her best friend. He typed back carefully. You're my best friend too, Sophie, forever. 3 dots appeared, then, forever and ever and ever? Lucas smiled through his tears. Forever and ever and ever. Promise. He sat there in his car as the city woke up around him and thought about promises. The one he'd made to his mother to never forget where he came from. The one he'd made to Sophie that he'd always be there. The one he was making to himself to use everything he had to fight for people who needed fighting for. And he thought about how one dinner, one moment of standing up when it would have been easier to stay seated, had changed absolutely everything. The man who made my daddy smile. Lucas touched the phone screen, the drawing visible beneath his message thread with Sophie, and felt his mother's presence as clearly as if she were sitting beside him. "I'm trying, Mom," he whispered to the empty car, to the ghost that lived in his heart. "I'm finally doing what you always wanted. I'm using it for good. I'm making it matter." The morning sun broke over the buildings, gilding everything in gold, and Lucas drove toward whatever came next with his heart full and his purpose clear, and the absolute certainty that he was finally on the right path. 6 months after that terrifying night at the hospital, spring arrived in the city with the kind of gentle persistence that made even cynics believe in new beginnings. The cherry trees along Sophie's street bloomed in clouds of pink and white, petals drifting down like snow, and Lucas Grant found himself noticing beauty he'd overlooked for years. The way morning light caught on dewdrops, the sound of children playing in parks, the simple grace of ordinary people living extraordinary lives in quiet ways that would never make headlines. The foundation had grown beyond anything Lucas had imagined that sleepless night after Sophie's birthday. They'd helped over 3,000 families now, providing everything from emergency housing to medical care to educational opportunities. The ripple effects were measurable and profound. Kids staying in school, parents able to work single jobs instead of 3, families stabilizing and then thriving. But Lucas had learned that numbers, while important, didn't capture what mattered most. It was the individual stories, the specific moments when hope replaced despair, that made everything worthwhile. Evan Brooks had become more than just the Foundation's first success story. He'd become Lucas's partner in the work, using his own experience to help guide the program's development. He'd cut back to 40 hours a week at the construction site, the Foundation's assistants making that possible, and spent his newfound time volunteering, talking to other single parents, offering the kind of support that only someone who'd lived it could provide. His presence lent authenticity and credibility that Lucas's billions never could. "You should hire him full-time," Sarah Chen had suggested a month ago, watching Evan comfort a crying mother at a Foundation event. "He's worth more to this organization than any credential or degree could provide." Lucas had done exactly that, creating a new position, Director of Family Outreach, with a salary that finally allowed Evan to breathe without constantly calculating whether they could afford groceries. Evan had cried when Lucas offered it, then laughed at himself for crying, then accepted with the fierce determination of a man who'd found his purpose. Sophie had thrived in ways that made Lucas's chest ache with gratitude. The nutritional deficiencies were corrected. Her grades, already good, had improved to excellent. She joined the school choir and discovered she loved singing almost as much as she loved drawing. And every Wednesday evening, without fail, she'd wait by the window for Lucas's car, then run outside to greet him the moment he pulled up. Her joy so pure and uncomplicated, it reminded him why any of this mattered. But it was a Saturday afternoon in late April when everything came full circle in a way Lucas hadn't anticipated. He was at home reviewing proposals for expanding the Foundation to other cities when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him answer. "Mr. Grant, this is Detective Sarah Williams with the police department. I'm calling about a situation that I think might interest you." Lucas's pulse quickened. "What kind of situation?" "We've arrested a man for running a fraudulent charity operation. He was collecting donations supposedly for homeless families, but keeping the money for himself. The thing is, when we searched his office, we found something odd. A list of names, families he'd apparently researched as potential targets. And Mr. Grant, the Brooks family, is on that list. Evan and Sophie Brooks." Lucas's blood went cold. "What do you mean, targets?" "It looks like he was planning to approach them, pretend to be from your foundation, and scam them out of whatever money or information he could get. We found detailed notes. Sophie's school, Evan's workplace, even information about Emily Brooks's death. It's disturbing, Mr. Grant. This man was clearly planning something." "Where is he now?" Lucas asked, his voice dangerous. "In custody. But the reason I'm calling, we found something else. Evidence that he's been running this scam for years, targeting vulnerable families across the state. We're talking dozens of victims, maybe hundreds. And it appears he specifically targets single parents who've lost spouses, people who are grieving and desperate and more likely to trust someone offering help. Lucas was already grabbing his keys. I'm coming down there. Where are you? 20 minutes later, he sat in Detective Williams' office, looking at files spread across her desk. Photos of families, including one of Evan and Sophie that had clearly been taken without their knowledge, mixed with financial records and handwritten notes that made Lucas's hands shake with rage. We caught him because of your interview, Detective Williams explained. She was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of exhaustion that came from seeing too much of humanity's worst. After you went public about the foundation, donations spiked. This guy, Dennis Crawford, saw an opportunity. He created a fake website mimicking yours, collected donations, and was preparing to target your known recipients directly. How did you catch him? Someone he'd scammed before saw the fake website and reported it. We set up a sting, caught him red-handed. But Mr. Grant, here's the thing. Crawford had very specific information about your foundation's recipients. Information that shouldn't be public. Lucas went very still. You're saying we have a leak. I'm saying someone in your organization or with access to your records has been feeding information to this predator, and we need to find out who before they can do more damage. The investigation took 3 days that felt like 3 years. Lucas brought in his own security team, worked directly with Detective Williams, and insisted on absolute transparency with the families involved. Sarah Chen coordinated with law enforcement, her usual calm efficiency overlaid with fierce protectiveness. They discovered the leak wasn't malicious, just a young intern who'd been manipulated by Crawford, given what she thought was a harmless request for statistical data, and not realizing she was providing a predator with ammunition. The intern was fired, though Lucas made sure she had counseling and support. Crawford was charged with fraud, identity theft, and a dozen other crimes that would put him away for years. The families on his list were contacted and warned, their information secured, their trust in the foundation reassured through personal visits from Lucas and Evan. But it was the conversation with the Brooks family that Lucas dreaded most. He sat in their living room, their new living room in the modest house the foundation had helped them purchase, where Sophie finally had her own bedroom and Evan had a workspace, and told them everything. Sophie listened with her characteristic seriousness, sitting between her father and Lucas on the couch. When he finished explaining about Crawford, about the photos, about how close they'd come to being targeted again, she was quiet for a long moment. "But we're safe now?" she finally asked. "You're safe," Lucas promised. "He's in jail, and we fixed the problems that let this happen. You're safe." Sophie nodded, then surprised him by climbing into his lap, something she rarely did anymore now that she was getting older, more conscious of being a big kid. She wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered in his ear, "I knew you'd protect us. You always do." Lucas held her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling the weight of her trust like both gift and responsibility. Over her head, he met Evan's eyes and saw reflected there the same fierce gratitude and love he felt. "Always," Lucas whispered back. "I promise. Always." The crisis became a catalyst for change. Lucas implemented new security measures, hired additional staff focused solely on protecting recipient privacy, and created an advisory board that included former recipients like Evan to ensure the foundation stayed grounded in the reality of the families it served. He also went public with what had happened, using it as a teaching moment about the predators who exploited vulnerability and the importance of protecting those seeking help. The response was overwhelming. Other nonprofits reached out to learn from his security protocols. Law enforcement agencies wanted to collaborate on identifying and preventing charity fraud. And thousands of people donated to the foundation specifically because of how Lucas had handled the crisis, with transparency, accountability, and unwavering commitment to the families he'd promised to serve. But the real transformation came on a Sunday in May, when Lucas found himself standing in a park with 500 people gathered for what Evan had dubbed the first annual Lily Brooks Foundation Family Day. It had been Evan's idea, a picnic where all the families who'd been helped by the foundation could meet, share their stories, and celebrate together. Lucas had worried it might be too much, too overwhelming, but Evan had insisted. "These families need to know they're not alone," Evan had said. "They need to see that there are hundreds of others who've been where they are, who understand, who've made it through. That's healing, Lucas. That's hope." Now, watching children play on the grass while parents swapped phone numbers and strategies, Watching Sophie and Emma teaching younger kids how to make flower crowns. Watching Evan talking with a newly widowed father who looked like he was drowning until Evan put a hand on his shoulder and said, "I know, I've been there. You're going to be okay." Lucas understood what Evan had meant. This wasn't just about money or resources. It was about community, about connection, about people who'd survived impossible things helping others do the same. Principal Martinez approached him with a woman Lucas didn't recognize, late 30s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Mr. Grant, this is Ashley Reeves. Her daughter is in Sophie's class. Ashley, this is Lucas Grant." Ashley shook his hand, then said something that made Lucas's breath catch. "Thank you. Your foundation, it saved us. My husband died 2 years ago, and I was drowning. Couldn't pay rent, couldn't afford my daughter's asthma medication, couldn't see any way forward. Then I got the letter saying we'd been accepted into the program, and—" Her voice broke. "You gave us our lives back." Lucas saw his mother in her face, saw every parent who'd ever had to choose between impossible options, who'd ever felt like they were failing their children despite doing everything right. "I'm glad we could help," he said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "But you saved yourself. You kept fighting for your daughter. That's what mattered most." "Still," Ashley said, wiping at her eyes, "thank you. And thanks Sophie. She's the one who told my daughter about the foundation, who brought the information home. If it wasn't for her, I never would have applied." After Ashley walked away, Principal Martinez smiled at Lucas. "Did you know Sophie does that? Quietly tells other kids about the foundation when she realizes their families might need help? She's like a little ambassador, spreading the word without making anyone feel bad. It's remarkable." Lucas looked across the park to where Sophie was now playing tag with a group of children, her laughter carrying on the spring breeze. She'd been through so much, losing her mother, that night at the restaurant, the hospital scare, and somehow she'd emerged not hardened but softened, not bitter but kinder, using her pain to help others rather than retreating into it. "She's her mother's daughter," he said quietly. "And her father's," Principal Martinez added, "and yours in all the ways that matter." The words hit Lucas unexpectedly hard. Yours. He'd never thought of himself as Sophie's father. That was Evan. That would always be Evan. But he was something. Uncle Lucas, Sophie called him sometimes. Or just Lucas. Her best friend besides Emma. The person she drew in all her pictures, the one she saved a seat for at school events, the one whose opinion mattered when she picked out a new dress or finished a book report. Family, he realized. That's what they'd become. Not through blood or law, but through choice and commitment and showing up over and over again. Later, as the sun began to set and families started packing up, Sophie found Lucas sitting on a bench watching it all. She climbed up next to him, leaning against his side in comfortable silence for a moment. "This was a good day," she said finally. "The best," Lucas agreed. "Lucas?" Sophie's voice went softer, more serious. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think my mommy knows about all of this? About the foundation and the families we've helped and everything?" Lucas thought about how to answer, about what truth and comfort both required. "I think if your mom can see us, she's incredibly proud. Of you, of your dad, of what we've all built together." "I think so too," Sophie said, "but sometimes I feel her, like she's right here with us, smiling." "I feel my mom sometimes too," Lucas admitted. "Usually when I'm doing something I know she would have loved, like this, seeing all these families together, happy, supported. She would have loved this." Sophie was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm glad you found us. That night at the restaurant. I'm glad you stood up for us." "Sophie, I'm glad I found you too. You changed my life. You saved me." She looked up at him with those hazel eyes so much like Emily's, so full of wisdom beyond her years. "We saved each other. That's what families do." And she was right. That's exactly what families did. 3 months later, on a warm August evening, Lucas stood in Le Chateau for a very different kind of dinner. The restaurant was closed to regular customers, transformed into an event space for what the invitations had called an evening of gratitude. Every table was filled with foundation recipients, volunteers, staff members, donors, and the people who'd made the past year possible. Sarah Chen had organized everything with her characteristic precision, but it was Evan who'd insisted on the location. "It started here," he'd said. "It should come full circle here." Lucas wore a suit but had skipped the tie. This wasn't a business event. This was family. The families they'd helped, the family they'd created, the family that had saved him from a life of empty success. Charles Beaumont, the manager who'd once tried to turn them away, now worked the room with genuine warmth, greeting families who'd participated in the Monday community dinners, ensuring everyone felt welcome. He caught Lucas's eye at one point and nodded, acknowledgement of how far they'd both come, how much they'd learned. When dinner was served, Lucas stood to speak. The room quieted, and he looked out at faces he'd come to know over the past year. Ashley Reeves and her daughter. Maria from the kitchen who'd brought her grandchildren. Marcus Thompson from the early planning meetings. Dr. Walsh who'd worked tirelessly to build the Foundation's healthcare program. And there, at a table in the front, Evan and Sophie Brooks. "A year ago," Lucas began, "I came to this restaurant as a customer. I left as something different, someone who'd been reminded of who I used to be, what I'd forgotten, why any of this mattered." He gestured around the room. "I thought I was successful because I'd built a billion-dollar company, because I had money and power and influence. But I was wrong. Success isn't about what you have. It's about what you do with what you have. It's about who you lift up along the way." He paused, gathering his thoughts, trying to find words adequate to what he felt. That night, an 8-year-old girl said 5 words that changed everything. "It's okay, Daddy, we can leave." Those same words my mother had said to me 25 years earlier, in a different restaurant when the world told us we didn't belong. And hearing them again, hearing Sophie try to comfort her father the way I'd tried to comfort my mother, something broke open inside me that I'd kept sealed shut since my mom died. Lucas's voice cracked slightly, and he didn't try to hide it. I realized I'd forgotten why I'd wanted to be successful in the first place. Not for the money or the status, but to make sure nobody else had to feel small the way we did. To make sure no other kid had to watch their parent cry because the world was cruel. To build something that mattered more than profit margins or stock prices. He looked directly at Sophie, who was watching him with shining eyes. Sophie reminded me of that. She and her father gave me back my purpose, my meaning, my heart. And from that one moment, all of this grew, the foundation, the community nights, the thousands of families we've been able to help. Lucas pulled out his phone and projected an image on the screen behind him. Sophie's original drawing, the 3 stick figures holding hands. Sophie gave me this that first night. 3 people. A little girl, her father, and a man she'd just met, connected by a moment of kindness. She wrote, "The man who made my daddy smile." But the truth is, she made me smile. She made me feel human again. She gave me back something I'd lost when my mother died. The ability to care about something bigger than myself. He clicked to the next image, a photo from earlier that day. 500 people in a park, families laughing and playing, children running through grass, parents supporting each other, community, connection, hope. "This is what success actually looks like," Lucas said. "Not balance sheets or quarterly earnings. This, people helping people, kindness rippling outward, second chances and new beginnings. Kids who can focus on being kids because their parents have support. Parents who can actually parent instead of just surviving." He clicked through more images. Families in their new apartments, kids receiving medical care, parents at job training programs, children at school with supplies they needed. Each photo represented a story, a life changed, a moment when someone had felt seen and valued and supported. "We've helped 3,000 families this year," Lucas continued. 3,000. And every single one of them is someone's child, someone's parent, someone who matters, someone who was working hard and just needed a little support, a little hope, a little reminder that they're not alone. He turned off the projector and looked around the room. "My mother, Maria Grant, worked 3 jobs to raise me. She never complained, never made me feel poor, never stopped believing I could be anything I wanted. When she died 5 years ago, I had everything I'd promised to give her, except time. I couldn't save her. I couldn't give her the rest she deserved. I couldn't make up for all those years of exhaustion and struggle. Lucas's voice broke completely now, and he had to pause, breathe, gather himself. Evan was crying. Sophie was crying. Half the room was crying. But maybe I can save someone else's mother, Lucas continued, his voice rough with emotion. Someone else's father. Maybe I can make sure some kid doesn't lose their parent to stress and overwork and a system that values profit over people. That's why we do this. That's why it matters. That's why I'll spend the rest of my life fighting to make sure every family has what they need to not just survive, but thrive. He raised his glass. To Lily Brooks, who I never met, but who raised an incredible daughter and loved an incredible man. To Maria Grant, who taught me that kindness matters more than money. To every parent in this room who's fighting to give their children a better life. And to Sophie, the little girl who saved a billionaire by reminding him what it means to be human. The room erupted in applause and tears and the kind of emotion that comes when people recognize truth. Sophie was on her feet, running to Lucas, and he caught her as she threw herself into his arms. "I love you," she said against his shoulder, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yeah, you're my family." "I love you too," Lucas said, not caring that everyone was watching, that his carefully constructed professional image was cracking open to reveal something real and messy and beautiful. "You're my family too, forever." Evan joined them, and the three of them stood there, the construction worker, the billionaire, and the child who'd brought them together, while everyone in the room witnessed what grace actually looked like. The rest of the evening was a blur of conversations and laughter and stories shared. Lucas talked with families about their progress, celebrated their victories, listened to their ongoing struggles, and made mental notes about how the foundation could better serve them. He watched Evan move through the room with the easy confidence of someone who'd found his calling, watched Sophie play with other children who'd become her friends through the foundation's events. And he thought about his mother, about how she'd have loved this, would have been in the kitchen helping prepare food, would have made sure every person felt welcomed and valued, would have found joy in seeing her son finally using his success for something that mattered. Near the end of the night, as families began to leave, Marcus Thompson pulled Lucas aside. "You know what you've started here, don't you? This isn't just a foundation anymore. It's a movement. Other cities are watching. Other billionaires are asking how they can replicate it. You're changing the conversation about wealth and responsibility." "I'm just trying to do what my mother would have wanted," Lucas said. "No," Marcus corrected gently. "You're doing what you wanted, what you needed. The money and the power were always just tools. You're the one who decided to use them for good. That's on you, man. Own it." Lucas thought about that as he drove Sophie and Evan home later that night. Sophie had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted and happy, still wearing the fancy dress Lucas had bought her for the evening. Evan sat in the passenger seat, quiet and contemplative. "You okay?" Lucas asked. "More than okay," Evan said. "I'm just thinking about how different our lives are now compared to a year ago. How close I came to giving up completely. How one night changed everything." "You never would have given up," Lucas said with certainty. "Not with Sophie depending on you." "Maybe not," Evan agreed. "But I was drowning, Lucas. Working all those hours, barely keeping our heads above water, watching Sophie grow up too fast because she was trying to take care of me. I was failing her." "You were surviving impossible circumstances," Lucas corrected. "There's a difference." They pulled up to the Brooks house. Not the apartment anymore, but a real house with a yard where Sophie could play and rooms where they could spread out and breathe. The foundation had helped with the down payment, but Evan's new salary meant they could afford the mortgage. It was theirs, earned and owned, a symbol of how far they'd come. Lucas helped carry sleeping Sophie inside, laid her gently in her bed, the one with the bookshelf Lucas had built for her birthday, full of books he'd carefully selected, the desk where she did homework, the walls covered in her artwork. She stirred slightly, mumbled something that sounded like "love you," and burrowed into her pillows. Downstairs, Evan made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table the way they had so many times before. But this felt different somehow, more settled, more certain, like they'd weathered storms and come through not just intact, but stronger. "I've been thinking," Evan said carefully, "about Emily, about how she'd feel about all of this." Lucas waited, giving him space to work through whatever he needed to say. "She always believed that people were basically good, that kindness mattered more than anything else. She used to say that every person we meet is fighting a battle we know nothing about, so we should always choose compassion. Evan smiled, though his eyes were wet. I got so angry after she died. At God, at the universe, at the unfairness of it all. Lost that belief in goodness for a while. That's understandable, Lucas said quietly. But you gave it back to me, Evan continued. You stood up in that restaurant when you didn't have to. You saw us, really saw us, when everyone else was looking away. You reminded me that Emily was right, that there is goodness in the world, that compassion matters. And now Sophie has that belief too. She's growing up knowing that people can be kind, that one person can make a difference, that helping others is what life's actually about. He looked at Lucas with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. That's Emily's real legacy. Not the foundation named after her, though that's incredible. But the fact that her daughter is growing up believing in goodness because you showed us it exists, that would have made her so happy. Lucas felt tears burning behind his eyes. I wish I'd known her. In a way you do, Evan said. Everything good about Sophie, that's Emily. The kindness, the empathy, the way she sees people who are hurting and wants to help, that's all Lily. And now you're helping Sophie become more of what her mother was. You're honoring Emily every day just by being part of our lives. They sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm, thinking about the women who'd shaped them, Maria and Emily, both gone too soon, both still present in everything that mattered. Lucas, Evan finally said, I know you've got your own place, your own life, but you should know this is your home too, whenever you need it, your family. Thank you, Lucas said, his voice rough. That means more than you know. He drove back to his penthouse as the city slept, and for the first time since his mother died, the space didn't feel empty, because he wasn't alone anymore. He had family, chosen family, but family nonetheless. He had purpose that went beyond profit. He had a little girl who called him her best friend, and a man who'd become his brother, and a foundation full of people who depended on him, showing up, doing the work, fighting the good fight. In his office, surrounded by photos of foundation families and Sophie's artwork and news articles about their growing impact, Lucas opened his laptop and started writing. An op-ed about wealth inequality, a proposal for policy changes, a plan to expand the foundation to 10 more cities. The work was endless, but it was good work, meaningful work, the kind his mother would have been proud of. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. She must have woken up and convinced Evan to let her send one text before going back to sleep. Tonight was perfect. Best family ever. Love you, infinity. Lucas typed back, Love you, infinity +1. Sleep tight, princess. He sat back in his chair and looked around his office, at the evidence of a life redirected, a purpose reclaimed, a heart reopened after years of self-protective numbness. And he thought about that night at Le Chateau, about 5 words spoken by a brave little girl, about how a single moment of choosing kindness over indifference had created ripples that were still spreading outward. The man who made my daddy smile. But Sophie had done more than make Evan smile. She'd made Lucas feel again, saved him from a life of hollow achievement, given him back his humanity, and in return, he'd promised to spend his life making sure no other child had to feel invisible, no other parent had to feel like they were failing, no other family had to choose between impossible options. It wasn't redemption. His mother was still gone, and nothing would change that. But it was purpose. It was meaning. It was a life worth living, full of people worth fighting for, full of moments that mattered more than any balance sheet or stock price ever could. Lucas pulled up the photo from the park. 500 people, families laughing and playing, community and connection and hope made visible. Then he opened his email and started working on the plans to expand. More cities, more families, more ripples spreading outward from one moment of choosing to stand up instead of stay seated, to care instead of ignore, to act instead of accept. Outside his window, the city sparkled with lights. Millions of people living their lives, fighting their battles, hoping for better days. Some of them struggling in ways Lucas couldn't see. Some of them one crisis away from disaster. Some of them just needing someone to see them, to acknowledge their worth, to offer a hand up instead of looking away. He couldn't save them all, but he could try. He could build systems and change policies. and use every resource at his disposal to make the world a little kinder, a little more just, a little more like the place his mother had always believed it could be. And somewhere, Lucas hoped, Maria Grant was watching her son finally become the man she'd raised him to be. Not the richest or the most powerful, but the kindest. The one who remembered where he came from. The one who used his success to lift others up. The man who made my daddy smile. Lucas touched the framed drawing on his desk, those three stick figures holding hands, connecting a billionaire and a construction worker and a little girl through a moment of grace, and smiled. This was success. This was what mattered. This was everything. And it had all started with 5 words, spoken by a brave child on the worst night that became the best night, when everything changed because one person chose to stand up and say, "This is wrong. You matter. I see you." 5 words that saved a life, that saved thousands of lives. 5 words that changed the world. "It's okay, Daddy. We can leave." But they hadn't left. They'd stayed. They'd fought. They'd built something beautiful together, and they were just getting started.